Okay, let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. Wishing you all a very good afternoon and welcome to the European Livestock Voice event here in the impressive surroundings of Concert Noble. I would ask you now to be seated and we can get started with proceedings. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to those of you who are joining us online this afternoon. My name is Rose O'Donovan and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Brussels-based agricultural publication AgriFacts. I'm also a farmer's daughter, I'll throw in the disclaimer, farmer's daughter from West Cork in Ireland, and it is my pleasure to moderate this event this afternoon. The theme of this gathering is the future of livestock in the EU and beyond, and I think you would agree that this debate is particularly timely and relevant for the sector, given the broader discussion on the sustainability agenda. The aim today is to have an open discussion among scientists, policymakers, NGOs and the private sector, to generate dialogue with all stakeholders and to address societal challenges through feasible and practical solutions. We are also keen to address the ongoing polarisation around animal husbandry and the role of livestock in our food systems and in our society. Now, we have a lot to get through before 6 p.m, so before we kick off proceedings, please allow me to go through some housekeeping announcements, if I may. For the order of play, first we're going to have the video message from FAO Director Tanawat Teenson. This will be followed by the first of 3 sessions on animal welfare in livestock farming. Each session will last 45 minutes, dealing with various aspects that are high, or should be high, on the EU agenda, namely animal welfare, environment and biodiversity, and the role of livestock in healthy diets and nutrition. The first speaker will set the scene, with the others then participating in the debate, and the final 15 minutes of each session will be devoted to question and answers with you, the audience. There are roving microphones available, and you will have an opportunity yourselves to ask questions. We will then break for a coffee break just before 4 p.m, and after that at 4:25, that will be followed by 2 further panel debates, and we'll finish up at around 6 p.m. Immediately afterwards then, you're invited to join us for a drinks reception, followed by a ceremony and a walking dinner to mark the 60th anniversary of Fefana. But first, ladies and gentlemen, I would invite you to listen briefly to a video message from Tanawat Teenson from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization on the FAO's role in promoting sustainable livestock production around the world. Just by way of introduction, Tanawat Teenson was appointed Director of the FAO's Animal Production and Health Division in 2022. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy and a Master of Science in Veterinary, Epidemiology and Economics from Utrecht University, as well as a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from Kasarts University in Thailand. He was also elected as Chairperson of the UN Committee on World Food Security in October 2019. So now I would ask the technical team to roll the video message, please, and we can listen to what Tanawat has to say.
Sustainable livestock production can refer to practices that aim to meet the needs of raising animals for food while minimizing negative environmental impact. Sustainable livestock production promotes the long-term viability of agri-food system, protects natural resources, improves economic resilience, and contributes to the more sustainable and resilient future. To produce more with less impact, we must first focus on improving the efficiencies of livestock system. This includes optimizing feed conversion, reduce feed waste, enhancing nutrients utilization, reducing the degradation of land and water resources, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, and mitigating environmental degradation. In addition, we must prioritize the adoption of climate-smart agriculture and livestock practices. FAO provides technical assistance to the countries in developing and implementing policies and strategies for sustainable livestock production, including climate-smart practices. FAO conduct trainings, programs, and workshops to enhance the capacities of farmers, extension workers, and policymakers in adopting climate-friendly livestock production techniques. FAO supports research and innovation in livestock production system, including the development and dissemination of climate-smart techniques and practices. Human and animal health are closely linked in several ways. For example, zoonotic disease can be transmitted between animal and humans. During the past decades, we have seen the outbreak of COVID-19, Ebola, and avian influenza. Transmission can occur through direct contact, consumption of contaminated food or water, or vectors like mosquitoes and ticks. Controlling zoonotic diseases requires understanding and addressing their origins in animal population. The misuse and overuse of antibiotics in animal production can contribute to the development of antimicrobial resistant AMR, which can then affect human health and animal health, leading to global economic losses. Ensuring the health and welfare of animals in the food production chain is essential for safeguarding food safety. Animal source foods play a critical role in a healthy diet, provide essential nutrients that are important for human health. However, it is important to note that a healthy diet can be achieved through a variety of food sources, including plant-based options. Balancing the consumption of animal and plant-based foods can contribute to a well-being and nutrient-dense diet. Small-scale producers often have limited access to land, water, and other natural resources, often struggling to access finance and credit to invest in their livestock operations. Many small-scale livestock producers lack access to training, extension services, and technical support. Small-scale livestock producers are often more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. Supporting small-scale livestock producers is crucial for enhancing rural livelihoods, food securities, and sustainable development. Addressing these challenges requires comprehensive interventions, including improving access to resources, providing financial and technical support, strengthening market linkages, promoting climate resilience, and enhancing animal health services.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Tanawat Teenson. And I think you would agree that the director at the FAO covered a sort of broad berth of topics there, and some of those issues we'll be returning to during the course of today's debate. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I would invite the speakers from the first panel discussion on animal welfare in livestock farming to join me on the podium. So please, Leo, Inej, and Antonio, please. Thank you. Very good. Just first up, allow me please to introduce my guests. I have on my right here Leo Terran, who is from the University of Liège. He graduated with a degree in molecular biology in Paris in 2001 and obtained his doctorate of veterinary medicine in Liège in 2007. His area of expertise specifically is in bovine mastitis, and he has traveled to more than 2,000 farms as part of his work. Next up, we have Inej Granio Ajuda, who is the Programme Leader for Farm Animal Welfare at Eurogroup for Animals since 2020. She completed her Master's in Veterinary Medicine in 2012 at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the Technical University in Lisboa. After completing her studies, she started working on the Animal Welfare Indicators Project, investigating animal welfare assessment, including pain. And finally, we have Antonio Velarde, who is head of the Animal Welfare Programme at the Institute for Agri-Food Research and Technology, IRTA, in Catalonia. Antonio holds a veterinary science degree, a doctorate in animal production, and a master's in science and welfare of laboratory animals. He is a European veterinary specialist in animal welfare, science, ethics and law at the European College of Animal Welfare and Behaviour Medicine, and is also a member of the panel on animal health and welfare at the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, in Parma. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you might notice that Lucie Carouet, who is Deputy Head of Unit on Animal Welfare in the Commission's DG Santé since February 2021, could not attend today's event due to another commitment. This is unfortunate, as we know that animal welfare is a topic that is going through revision at the moment, and this whole area has been, I suppose, put on ice. So it is unfortunate that Lucie or none of her colleagues from DG Santé is here, so she sends her apology. It was a last-minute cancellation on her part, so we apologise for that on her behalf. But please give my distinguished guests a warm round of applause, and we'll get going with the discussion. So Leo, without further ado, I would ask you briefly to set the scene, to frame our debate. So when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Hello, everybody. Agriculture was not my culture. I grew up in an island in the South Pacific, and I happened to discover agriculture when I was 20 years old, when I came to Europe for my studies. It was a very interesting discovery because I was new to agricultural system, I tend to understand the fine equilibrium that are nurtured by agriculture. It's a way of life that brought me to many, many countries, specifically New Zealand, for example, on the right, on the picture, on the left. And it's interesting because if you speak to normal people, they will tend to think that open graze areas are better than technological barns, as we have in high-income countries. But digging the system, I happen to understand that there was more than just the apparent welfare that is dedicated to that, because if you look to New Zealand, for example, they are now understanding the pressure that they are putting on their ecosystem, where in Europe we ruled out these equilibriums 30 years ago. It was also interesting that we are social animals as Homo sapiens. And we are constantly shaping our environment. And for most people, this picture will just say, oh, what a wonderful countryside. Because they don't understand that this is a productive area. And these ecosystems are complex to explain, because pasture is actually an alternative to culture for many people. But instead, pastures have always been the low-producing grounds, accessible only for domesticated ruminants and wild ruminants. This is also interesting because the only protection of these ecosystems is actually called cows. And if we look deeply inside, these secret pastures are also a secret vault, because they hold 70% of the human-made carbon vault. So this is interesting because for the future, we know that in Belgium, for the last 30 years, we've been stocking carbon more in pastured areas, grazing areas, than in any other places. Our system cannot be disconnected from a world vision, because the Earth is unable to produce food in more than 30% of its surface. So, if we go to a broader vision, this is Ahmed. Ahmed is a close friend. He holds dairy farms in the border between Algeria and Morocco, and he's grazing dairy cows. His system is based on not pasture, because the sand is the only ecosystem he got. But slowly but surely, grazing these cows, he's producing his own food environment in a country where the consumption of milk is 30% higher than in our countries. So basically, years after years, he's growing the ecosystem is transforming slowly the desert into arable lands. Well, we have to be aware that domestication has been a long process, 6,000 years. And we reach some dead ends in some of our systems. And we need to evolve. And this is what we do as Homo sapiens, we evolved. But lowering EU agricultural production is bringing Ahmed another problem, is that he's now buying his heifers from Brazil. So he's activating a transatlantic flow to sustain their own need for development. Our relation to farm animals is complex. We need a framework. We need some clear lines. Because we are not just taking decisions, we are playing with human life, farmer life, and farmer animals. Our cows are now more checked, I would say, than most of the pregnant women in our societies. I mean, my cows, they have close follow-ups until the calving and even preparing lactation and calving, for example, which is nowadays quite difficult for women. We still can learn from this close relationship we built around the last 6,000 years. And because we are Homo sapiens, we can find new equilibriums between food production, carbon storage, and animal welfare. The real question is, do we do it the hard way, or do we do it through constant process? Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. Well, I think you've set the scene there very succinctly and briefly, which is what we were after. I said there in my introduction that you visited 2,000 farms over the course of your career. What would you say are the key challenges when it comes to this specific area of animal welfare and animal welfare management?
I think that farmers have been able to do everything we asked them to. The only thing that is difficult in these latest years is that the framework is changing every year. So for them, it's extremely difficult because the life normal cycle for a farm is like 5 to 7 years to undergo major changes. So they are just waiting for us, policymakers, technicians, scientists, to give them the framework they need to respect because they are ready to evolve. And this is the main complexity that they got, is that the uncertainty of nowadays is making a huge stress on them and therefore on the animals.
And you said you went, during your studies or your work, you went to New Zealand. What were some of the key differences between, you said it's sort of the different production methods that are in New Zealand compared to the European Union, or certain parts, maybe certain countries that you know best within the EU. What were sort of the key differences that you saw there from your experience?
Well, if you go back 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I was a young kid, there was a vision that low intake, low outcome of systems like dairy production was a nice way to do production. But with the intensity of the raising of population in New Zealand, for example, you see more and more systems that looks just like us, because they just have a density, land price is going up, and land use is now limited.
But then you're talking New Zealand as well. It's a major export nation. It's a population similar to Ireland, about 4.5 million. So it's not necessarily for self-sufficiency. It's an exporting country. So that's there. You've got the likes of Fonterra driving that. So it's maybe a different mindset as well, right? But how do they keep those animal welfare standards high, would you say?
Well, for them, the welfare standard is no barns. So it's limited to that. But they understood also that they were polluting their own freshwater, their own grounds, to a high level that we didn't see in Europe for the last 30 years. So it's interesting because the evolution that we got in Europe is now more and more a model, I think, for the rest of the world. And we need to be able to teach that because we will need animal production anyway to whatever level we want to do it. But we need it for a different reason, for phosphorus shortage in the near future, for example. And ruminants, for example, are the only one that can convert plant phosphorus into interesting phosphorus content for the food, for example.
And you said that farmers are constantly, I suppose, there's a barrage of policy changes. Rules are changing constantly, and as we're aware, the animal welfare legislation is under review. Let's put it like that. For the moment, it's been put aside. But your message from farmers on the ground, what do they find as, say, the most challenging?
The most challenging for farmers in Europe, for example, is to be in competition with people that don't have any close standards from them. And this is something that is quite difficult. If we want to switch from a global production model to a local production model, this is quite interesting that some people in Europe, they see this as a future. But in fact, most of the people in the world, they live in countries where the capacity of agricultural production is quite low. And if we look at the map that I shown, the possibility of expansion of development of civilization in other parts of the world is quite linked to their ability to buy food.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Leo. I'm going to turn to Inej now, and you're coming, of course, from a different perspective from Eurogroup for Animals. You've been part of an organization that has been extremely vocal and extremely exercised on the whole end the cage age. Maybe you might talk us through that, and Inej, maybe visualize what would that look like? What would farming production systems look like without confinement? And maybe just your own involvement in that initiative, the European Citizens Initiative, End the Cage Age.
So, as you referred, we were...
Do you have a mic on?
There we go. Hey. So, as you referred, we were heavily involved on the ECI end of the cages, or as it started. And I was very lucky that I was at Compassion World Farming, which opened the ECI, working there, and I saw the moment. And then I moved now to Eurogroup to really be able to make sure that we deliver and we get something very good out of it. You know, I think one of the big questions around it is we get that what is a cage, and what it means is that it is something that severely restricts the movement and the ability for animals to express whatever you want to call it, natural, normal behaviors on farm. And this can also include things that are not so physical or so, you know, materialized, like tethering a cow, for example. And we, you know, it's been a long journey, as you said. It ended up with an announcement of a revision of the animal welfare legislation with a commitment to end cages across Europe, which, of course, we're very happy and proud of. It is now a little bit delayed. But what we see is that I think this, and also what Leonard was just saying, I think it really shows there is an urgency to get something out there for the farmers to know where to invest and how to invest wisely. Because the risk is, you know, is that we keep postponing and delaying, and then farmers eventually have to make a decision because depreciation periods of systems are ending, and they don't have a solid kind of, this is where you should go. And this creates a lot of problems, not just that in terms of wrong investments, or, you know, wrong in a sense that there was no guidance, so at a certain point you have to decide. But also this creates a lot of frustration, especially for younger farmers that are starting. Because, you know, if you want to go and ask for an investment, if you say, well, I want to build a farm that is cage-free, the bank was going to go like, well, don't be such an entrepreneur, you know, just go with whatever the legislation says. If they had some kind of legislation to go for it, they'll go like, well, this is what the legislation says. And then they would be able to invest in the system that also they relate to it, they understand the consumers are wanting, and they understand it's better for animals. So that's why we're very still committed to make sure that this legislation is delivered, because we see, of course, it's a massive benefit for animals. And I don't even enter into that, you know, explanation anymore, because I think it's clear. And no one is questioning it anymore at any level, also here in Brussels.
But the question, really, Inej, that's being posed numerous times is, you mentioned the transition, you mentioned the investment. How do you think this could be financed potentially? Will there be public support? Because as you say, that's sort of the question on everyone's lips, be it young farmers, be it guys that are involved in farming for the past 20 years. They're looking at their enterprise and they're wondering, what should I do in terms of investment? So would you, you know, when the ECI was tabled to the European Commission, what sort of feedback were you getting in terms of how this would be funded?
I think, so the first step is that it gives some solitude for investment, so as I referred to. Also, you know, that was a big question for us, and Compassion, for example, has a good report, kind of shows the first steps, and it's obvious that it has to come, there needs to exist financing from EU level, but also, if you look at Germany example, they already are stopping some types of cages, or at least some temporary confinement, and they already are now concluding that national level needs also to get in. And then there are other two features that we think are quite important. So the first one is that it needs to provide kind of an award for farmers that want to go first. So we don't end up with what happened with enriched cages for laying hens, that there was a delay, and then it hit the deadline, and there was a disruption in the market because a lot of farmers hadn't go for it. So financing needs to really stimulate that staggered transformation and transference. And the second thing is also, and this is something that it is from learnings of countries that are already doing it, not all farmers have to comply to this or want to comply to this, so they are also free to end their businesses. So finance should also help them to do that, It's fair enough. Going cage-free, it's a very different mindset, a very different type of management. And from my experience also, from my previous jobs, to working with farms that were converting, there was a specific farm manager, and I will always guard this with me, that said, before when this was laying hens, when laying hens were in cages, I used to manage the animals. Now that they are cage-free, they manage me. It's a very different mindset. So of course there should also be financing for farmers that say, look, I'm ending my career very soon anyway, and I don't want to change my mindset. So, they should also be supported.
Okay, so you're saying public support there.
Yeah.
Can we just talk, maybe switching now from cages, sort of enhanced animal welfare standards more generally, right? And as you say, the legislation, I'm sure an organisation such as yours was very disappointed when you didn't get a clear message about where we stood on that piece of legislation when Ursula von der Leyen made her State of the Union speech on September 13th. But how do you see large, or all farms, let's say, across the scale, implementing more enhanced standards? Do you see this as feasible? Do you see this as sort of a roadblock? Or, what's sort of your take on that as an organisation, and what sort of feedback are you getting from farmers on the ground?
So, first of all, I think we are not disappointed yet, because for us, until we hear the bell,
sure,
it's
the
still
bell
a game.
hasn't rung, the fat lady hasn't sung yet.
So that's the first point. And I think the second point is, before you didn't mention it, but I used to practice as a dairy vet. Then I moved to an organization that was doing a lot of corporate engagement on the positive side, looking at supply chains and so on. And now I'm here on the political side of the debate. And what I see when I moved to Brussels is that, voices like, for example, what Leonard was explaining in terms of farming, they are not as loud as they should be. This need for the farmers for guidance, for something that is solid for them, it's not coming through. The message is no one wants this to happen, so it should be delayed. But I think but when I talk with farmers on the ground, they all tell me the same thing. I need to invest, and I need to invest. So come on, let's see something. So it would be good to see more of that, and would love to see more of that, of those voices. So.
Thank you, Inej. Thank you for that. Very, very, very clear message there. Antonio, I'm going to turn to you. You're head of animal welfare program at IRTA in Catalonia. So let's stick with and it is unfortunate, as I say, that we do not have a DG Santé representative here today, but let's focus on the revision of EU legislation when that may come about, who knows. But it's intended to look at sort of the major scientific developments, right, in this whole area. So can you perhaps provide us with some examples of developments that would enhance animal welfare on farms?
I can try. I don't know what will be in the legislation. From a scientific point of view, I think the revision of the opinion. Some good development is how. The first one is how to have the concept of animal welfare. Traditionally we have focused on avoid welfare problems and how to prevent welfare problems, but welfare can be also a positive side. Also, the approach also to enhance positive welfare can give also another scope. Not only to prevent negative welfare consequence, but also to promote positive welfare consequence. And this gives also the identification of indicators of good animal welfare. And I think this should be also in the head in the approach when we are talking about animal welfare. And continuing with this, I think how to measure, how to assess animal welfare is important, because if we don't have information about the welfare of the animals, we cannot take any decision. And I think now the technologies in the farm is very important. To have sensors that you have on real time the information about how are the animals is crucial to have this information to take any decision. And I think the smart livestock and the equipment with sensors that can record this is a good development that I think we need to have into consideration. Also the training of the staff to manage this data and to know how to take decisions, I think this is crucial, and we always say that the training and the knowledge is maybe the low-cost strategy to have an improvement in animal welfare, and I think we promote also this very much. And I mean, housing conditions like the space and the enrichment that promote more behavioral needs to the animals, I think is important. And another development is the genetics. I think the genetics, I mean, traits for improve animal welfare, this is also a key. And I am aware now that genetics, they are working to include animal welfare traits in the genetic selection. And I think this is also an important way to improve animal welfare.
Thank you. And one area, Antonio, that I'd like to pick you up on, the whole area, and it's a very contentious area, and coming from the island of Ireland, the transportation of live animals, right? So highly contentious. Obviously, there's calls for the 8-hour transport limit, etc. From a scientific perspective, I suppose just let's look at the science behind it with regard to the transportation of animals. What are sort of the key challenges there? What sort of recommendations would you have, particularly for those countries that want to accept, that will not accept carcasses, right, for whatever their market demand is different? So I suppose the move, you know, the European Parliament, particularly here in Europe, has been very vocal that they want to switch to carcass only. Obviously, it's contentious, it's at the highest policy level, but from a scientific perspective, what are the key challenges and what are the recommendations that you would give to sort of operators, exporters, etc.?
Yes, transport is a very peculiar part of the production because it's, in reality, in the life of the animal, is very short period of time. But during this short period of time, the animals are exposed to a high variety of stress factors because they are at the same time moving from the farm, where they has been lived all the time there, to a new environment, new handling. They have during transport a restriction of movement, I mean, because they cannot be transported in the same space that they are on the farm. They are mixing animals. I mean, normally they are deprived of food, and maybe they can have some drinkers, but I mean, it has not been proved that also having water and feed, all animals can be fed and can be provided with water in the truck. Also, there is a lot of factors appearing at the same time, and it's difficult to remove these factors. But the idea is, if we can reduce the impact of these factors, maybe it's better for the animals. No? But I think the major challenge is the reduction of the space, that it may impair, I mean, it may have resting problems, and also to maintain balance during acceleration. The extreme weather, either hot condition or cold condition, also it's a challenge how to design vehicles that can control the temperature, also having outside extreme temperature, and the duration of the journeys. I mean, how to maintain the longer the journey, the more time the animals are exposed to these problems. Also, the challenges to think about. I mean, the best practice maybe is, if for the slaughter animals, if you can slaughter close to the farm, to do it there, then transport the carcass. But in some cases, for example, if there is for breeding, you need to transport these animals also to do, I mean, especially the space and the temperature conditions to allow to have a better welfare.
Okay, thank you, Antonio. I might go back to you, Leo, now. I suppose one of the big issues with the animal welfare legislation is monitoring and surveillance, right? And the idea of harmonization of rules across the European Union. What would you say are the key challenges and, I suppose, the areas where we could improve on monitoring across member states?
That's a tough question. I would say that there is no framework for evaluation of welfare. So we have the welfare quality, but to be honest, practically to have been working with, it's extremely difficult to popularize. I know that in UK they did some work on finding the farmers that have obvious welfare issue. I think if the industry is also acting toward this, for example, if you look at antibiotic reduction, it was a slow process only on the hand of the vets, and as soon as the industry, the dairy industry mainly, came in the game, it was a huge push, because then the whole chain of value was collaborating in the same direction. So I guess for welfare we will need the same. We will need to unify the vets can do this, we can do this, but we need also some push, because we don't want to be the only crusader of the One Health, as usual. So reducing antibiotics on our own, raising welfare on our own, along with the farmers. So we need to be grouped against these things and to have common framework.
And a value chain approach, as you say, from across the value chain. Yeah. Inej, I might turn to you now. Consumers at the end of the value chain, right? A lot of consumers say, oh yes, I want to buy my products, I want animal welfare standards. But is that coming to pass? We're, of course, in the middle of a cost of living crisis at the moment. Food inflation was at an all-time high. So are consumers still, making those decisions when it comes to what they do in their weekly shop?
I love when people ask me that question, because it allows me to talk a little bit about food environments. Okay. So I think, the fact that people want, for example, animal welfare, and we've seen it clearly over and over again in surveys, hopefully a new survey coming out and showing that as well. And the fact that then sometimes that doesn't materialize on their shopping cart, it really tells that there is something wrong that is not allowing them to meet their expectations when they are, well, them, us, because it's all of us, when we are shopping. And one of the things that is growing a lot here in Brussels, but also I think across the entire member states, is about food environments. It's about that consumers really in the end don't have this free choice that we think they have, and their choices don't fall on a void. There is a lot around them that is not allowing them to make the right choices, and we can't just think, that a person just goes into the supermarket and makes this choice on this void. There are adverts that are not right, and this is not just about animal products, it's across, it's adverts that are not right, prices that are not matching what people should be actually be eating more. Sometimes it's more expensive than what they shouldn't be eating, about exposure of the younger crowd to certain types of products and so on. So there is a lot of measures around this. They go way beyond animal welfare, even sustainability, that needs to change. And I think this is very telling, if people are asking, if people want, if people care, and then in the end they're not able to, make the choice that we're expecting them to do, it tells that something is really broken.
And are you saying that the buck stops then with the retailers and the wholesalers, like to create a better environment, going back to what Leo said, really about the whole value chain approach, right?
Yes, a part of it stops on the retailers, but I think there's also, for example, at EU policy level, our agri-food promotion should really, match this expectation in this good food environment, and really tell people, and direct people to the healthy choices, So there is the retailer part of it, but there's also much more than that, I think.
Okay, thanks, Inej, for that. And we do have a DG Agri representative in a moment in another panel. Leo, you wanted to jump in there with a point.
No, this is something that I also say to Farmer Syndicate. For example, the learning of agriculture in our primary schools is zero. So we don't teach our kids how to produce food. We don't even teach our kids how to cook, for example. And I was surprised that my kids, when they go to the supermarket with us, they also say, okay, Daddy, you have the Nutri-Score everywhere. So now they have also a clear choice of, okay, Nutri-Score A is better than F, for example, and they know that. So if we switch to a value chain change on animal welfare, they will surely push us because they are the one to change. I mean, we are adults, we are not prone to change, most of us, but the kids will do. Mm-hmm. So if we want to implement this change, we need to focus also on the kids, mm-hmm. on that area.
And that's interesting that you mentioned Nutri-Score, because of course that's another flashpoint here in the European Union as well. Antonio, back to you. It's a highly emotive issue, right? It's a very emotive, it's lots of people have differing opinions on what animal welfare should be or could be. There's an ethical issue to this as well. But what sort of direction can the scientific community give in this whole area?
Yes, I mean, here is a welfare issue and an ethical issue. And I think from the scientific community, what we can do is provide the elements for you to have an ethical discussion or more objective. And I think this is our task. I mean, to put in the indicators to know, I mean, how to measure the welfare, or how can we say that this welfare is impaired, or is it good? And also I think developing animal welfare measures is a key issue to have an objective assessment of the welfare. Then we can decide, or we can discuss what is ethical, acceptable or not, or what is legally assumed can be done or not. But I think this is the base, and to have animal-based indicators to assess this I think is crucial.
Okay,
and this is part of the work.
That's part of the work.
Yeah.
Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, we might open it up to the floor now. Are there any questions? I've allowed plenty of time for question and answers with the audience. So if you'd like to pose a question, please raise your hand and we'll get a roving microphone out to you. Who'd like to go first? Please. Can we get a microphone over here? Maybe introduce yourself as well and say to whom the question is addressed. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Catherine Bühler. I'm here as the Swiss national partner. I liked your comment there, Leo, that we massively lack education on how food, be it vegetable or animal-based food, is produced. And that leads me to the comment of Ines of giving a choice, but because very often this perception of the consumer is based on wish and not on, let's say, animal requirement. If I give, for example, poultry more space, the consumer thinks that's for welfare, but maybe
space or not, and the truth is they need. So, you know, it's in this specific case, you know, but I think, and one of the questions I get asked constantly is, you know, how do we collaborate across multi-stakeholders and so on? And the basis should always be, and as a researcher I say this, it should be science, it should be facts. We all have emotions around food. As soon as we are born, we have a feeling about food, that's it. You know, so yes, but emotions aside, there are facts. And you should look at those facts in order to be able to have these discussions. And of course, you know, if consumers say, well, hanging an animal by their feet is the best thing to do, okay, wait, let's also look at the facts. So of course, you know, I don't ever have seen any decision on, you know, it's a production system that is only solely based on, you know, someone that doesn't know asking for something. It can start with that because retailers have to respond to their consumers, but then there's a whole work that brilliant researchers are doing to help us really, you know, answer that question. So of course, science and facts need to be a very important part of it.
Thank you, very clear, Ines. Can I ask you about collaboration across stakeholders? How would you like, coming from Eurogroup for Animals, how would you like to see that improved going forward?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, question that I get asked a lot of times, and I think, you know, the fact that we all say animal welfare is important is our starting point. From that on, then yes, sometimes it's more of a challenging discussion, sometimes it's not, but I think, you know, again, I always say there is a basis, so we can start that debate, and that's facts and science. And then we go from there. And sometimes that can be a little bit challenging because, you know, we come from an animal welfare perspective. Some people from, you know, other multi-stakeholders may come from an economic viability perspective and so on. And of course, and EFSA opinions are a very good example of it. Yes, you know, you may say, well, this is not economically viable, so we can't do this. Fine. But if science is pointing us towards a specific path, we should at least look into that and see why science is so, you know, sometimes dissonant from what's happening in the reality, like what's happening there, and let's sit down. And there's always common points once you sit down and start listening to the other, you know, other stakeholders. So we would like to see more of that for sure.
Further dialogue. Leo, going back to a point that you made earlier about imports coming into the European Union, not, I suppose, coming up to the standard of European animal welfare requirements, let's say. How do you see that going forward in the future, for example? You said it's highly competitive now, it's a highly competitive environment. There are costs, obviously, linked with these animal welfare requirements at EU level, and then imports are coming in from other countries, third countries, that don't have to meet those requirements. So what sort of like, how do you see this kind of progressing, let's say?
I would say that definitely if we stop farming, for example, there will be no example anymore in the world of where we should go. So EU, for me, has the most sustainable agriculture on the planet. And most of people are not aware of that. So if we want to be a model for the rest of the world, we need to continue to progress, continue to draw the lines, and to be leaders in animal welfare. And this will be a competitive advantage, not now, but in the future. And as Ines said, our science before now driven us to production. So all the systems are based on a science for production, not science for welfare. So now we are entering the phase where science for welfare is increasing. So in the next 15 years, we will be there, what science for welfare driven us. So it's a constant process for me. We cannot see it as a picture, it's a movie. So we are moving to a new world, but if we go back to the universities, I know in Liège, for example, the professor for welfare has the smallest unit. No funding, no nothing. So we need also to invest in the people that will bring that science.
And researchers in science. Any other questions from the floor now? Please, this gentleman up here, could you get a microphone? Third row back. There we go, the floor is yours, sir.
Hi, my name is Hans van Dam from Trouw Nutrition. I was intrigued by the question on, okay, what is scientifically correct when it comes to welfare? And when I look at let's say the European Citizens Initiative and the KHAs, then to a certain extent this should be based on science, I'm pretty sure. But people react usually in a more emotional way. They think that a pen is something bad, by definition. And when I hear then Antonio's story, is maybe it should be possible really on a farm-to-farm basis to measure the actual situation where the animal is in. Does it have a good welfare or not? And could it be that in the future you do not regulate the type of installations on a farm, but that you would just measure on a more or less continuous basis how welfare is doing, and that in case these parameters go wrong, then you have to do something as a farmer?
Antonio, please.
Yes, I think this will be the ideal world, and because I mean farming systems there are a lot and a variety, and it's very difficult to assess the housing conditions, because in different places they can be different. But if by the end of the day you say, I mean, the requirement is to have a level of welfare of, I don't know, 6 or 7, and if this is below, you can do whatever you think is more appropriate, but do it and give the freedom to the farmers to decide what is more, but you are controlling the welfare of the animal, not the surrounding or the environment. I think this will be the ideal situation by the end. From a scientific point of view, I agree on this.
Okay, Ines, you wanted to intervene?
Yes, please. So I think, I worked for years on animal welfare indicators, and I'm all for animal-based indicators. But there are certain things that science, or certain systems that science has already told us this system will never meet the potential for that animal to express enough to have animal welfare indicators that will indicate a good and positive animal welfare. So it needs to be a mixture of the two approaches. So there are these systems that that will never be possible to reach a certain point of a holistic point of indicators, not just health, physical health, but also mental health and ability to express behaviors. So those systems need to be removed. Then for the other systems, 100%, because crappy management, the bad management can happen in any system, So of course you should monitor animals, you should have animal welfare-based indicators to really know, but we know from science that some of them will never reach that level that we are aspiring as for the EU production. And that's why it needs to be a mix and not solely about, thinking about animal-based indicators.
Thank you. Could I ask you, Antonio, about your work at the European Food Safety Authority? You're on the panel for animal health and welfare. Now, your panel did come out with some opinions recently, scientific opinions on dairy cows and calves, right? Are there other opinions in the pipeline?
And, now there are two opinions that will be launched. The there's not the mandate yet, but they are coming, that is about beef cattle and turkeys on farm.
Okay. And that's in terms of housing, stress levels, indicators? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
it mainly is they define the husbandry systems to identify the main welfare consequence, the main hazards, and to propose recommendations.
Okay. We'll await that in the future.
Yes, but just to clarify, I mean, the EFSA is only, maybe I have repeated this several times, but it's only focused on animal welfare. I mean, it does not consider, in the opinion, any environmental, economical impact, that this should be assessed, obviously, but in another field or in another aspect. But always you need to have this integrative approach, but it's better to separate, and not when you are talking about animal welfare to mix the economical aspect in the animal welfare aspect.
Sure, and that's your mandate, as you say, in the Parma at EFSA. It's from the animal welfare perspective. Do we have another question, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, please, right over here.
Hi, Roshan, thanks. Brian Curtin from Zimpro. Just would like to ask the panel, in terms of the future of EU livestock, where does organic farming fit into the picture in terms of welfare and sustainability?
Okay, thank you for that question. Who'd like to take that? Organic farming when it comes to livestock production. Antonio? Okay,
I can kick this off. I think organic farming is way more holistic and goes way beyond animal welfare. So on our animal welfare perspective, we still see some room for improvement, and we are quite vocal about it, because some of the practices that we believe, and science shows that they are not possible or compatible with the positive animal welfare, are still allowed in organic. But in terms of legislation, it has more detail and more, goes a little bit more ambitious than the minimum EU legislation. So, in a very factual way of comparing the two, organic has more requirements for animal welfare, although we still believe that it needs more than the minimum EU legislation.
Okay. Antonio, did you want to chime in there?
No. I mean, the organic production is something, I mean, they have more requirements, but it's not only animal welfare. They have other requirements, and sometimes we mix this. I mean, you can have also welfare problem in organic production by other topics, no? Or you can have also in non-organic production good animal welfare standards. Sometimes it's difficult to disentangle the animal welfare and the organic production. Also, I agree that normally they have better welfare standards.
Leo, do you see organic production expanding in the whole livestock sector?
Well, market-wise, it's going to be difficult. But from the animal point of view or the holistic point of view, because I think Ines said something really important, organic farming is more than just the animals and the plants. It's a vision. What I see is that some disease, for example, that are affecting welfare, like lameness or mastitis, have the same impact in organic farming than in conventional farming. So these specific disease attend to the welfare condition of the animals has to be exactly managed the same way in organic farming and in conventional farming. So I guess organic farming will also have their own challenge talking about welfare, because the same way when you travel a lot, you see the good side of organic farming, and you see also the, how do you say it, crappy?
There's room for improvement, as you say, Leo. You mentioned your area of expertise, which is bovine mastitis. What other research areas in this domain are quite prevalent, say at your university, or that you've seen during your travels on that, in the whole area of animal welfare?
Well, bovine mastitis is the first cause of use of antibiotics in dairy farming. So this is obvious. The main challenge now is to reduce the use of antibiotics through on-farm culturing approach, prevention, vaccination. These areas are expanding now because there's a need to change. And it's, like I said, it's a movie. So as soon as there is no constraint on the system, there is no change. As soon as you put some constraints on the use of antibiotics, science is evolving, industry is evolving, and and the consumers also are asking for something else because they see more, etc., etc. So in mastitis, for example, we are now checking for probiotics. We are now checking to understand more the health of the skin of the animals. We are now understanding also more about the quality of the environment, and not just the setting of the barn, but the litter, the composition, the biological composition of the litter. So it's much more than just a building or an animal. It's a whole ecosystem that we need to be built to be resilient for disease.
Okay, and as you say, adopting a more holistic approach. I'm going to maybe turn it over to the floor again. Do we have another question from the floor, ladies and gentlemen? And then we'll wrap up this session. Yes, right at the back.
Hi, I'm Diana Teixeira from Animal Health Europe. So basically, we assisted to Ursula von der Leyen SO2, the State of Nation, and she mentioned that we should promote more dialogue and then polarization. So taking my hat of Animal Health Europe and putting my hat of a daughter of a farmer and a vet, what I see is farmers actually work 24 hours, 7 days of the week, and they care. They do everything for their animals, and they are also looking for solutions. So people would not have this job if they wouldn't care, because it's tough, it's difficult. And what I wanted to ask you is, how do you see the dialogue being constructed? What strategies can we have to have more dialogue, to reach solutions?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Who will I put? I'm going to go to Inês first. So this lady is referring to the State of the Union made on the September 13th, where she referred to this idea of structured dialogue between the stakeholders on the future of the agricultural sector. So we all know farmers work very hard, as you say, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the essence is that they care, right? They care about their animals. There is room for improvement, obviously, on certain farms, but how do you see this dialogue progressing?
So, turn this on. So the first thing to say is that, and thank you, Diana, for that question, because it's very good in the sense that the reason why I stopped being a dairy vet and I came to have a bigger impact was because of that. Because I saw my farmers every single day suffering every day from a very broken system that they couldn't get out of. And I was like, there's something more that I can do, and it's not here being a vet, unfortunately, although I loved it, but it's something, so that is a very big truth. And that is what spiked me. I went for the animal welfare, I could have gone to something else, but to really make an impact. And I would love, as I said before, that these farmers have a much more active voice in Brussels, because at the moment, the voice of the farmers in Brussels is not reflecting that reality that I've experienced as a vet, and I've seen my clients every day. So I would, it would be amazing, and I'm very, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this, because what I see here in Brussels is not what the reality of these farmers are going through, the voice. So for us, one thing that we are doing already with researchers, happy, that someone else does it with farmers, we can do it as well, is to really, bring the politics to them, give them, maybe finance their travels here, get them a little bit more into this reality, because sometimes people think, oh, it's legislation, we'll never be able to influence this. It's not true. There are ways of doing it, but we need to bring political advocacy to these people that are working, as you said, 24 hours and probably don't have the time to look for them themselves. And it would be amazing to hear these voices way more in Brussels, because at the moment they are not here, and it's unfortunate, very, very unfortunate.
Okay, we should say that we do have Pekka Pesonen in the room as well, who will be taking part in the high-level debate in the latter part of the day, representing farmer organisations and cooperatives. Antonio, I'm going to turn to you. What is your main message? Inês gave a very impassioned plea there. What's your main message to policymakers when they start thinking about the revision of animal welfare legislation? What's your sort of message du jour?
Message is, animal welfare is, I think, is now a reality in the production, but it should be sustainable, I think, and we have to find the way to do this. And I still think that training of the staff, of the farmer in animal welfare, identify the welfare problems in an early stage, and how to have a strategy how to manage this is, I think, is is needed. I mean, there has been an improvement, but there is still, and all the revision that we have done, the staff, the management is a critical factor. But I think we have to find solutions that maybe without an additional cost, it should be feasible to be on farm.
Practical on the ground, okay? Leo, last word to you.
I would, for the dialogue, for example, I would also promote farmers that have good practices, because nowadays they have the feeling that anything they do is wrong. And I think when you go inside a farm and the cows are coming licking you like that, you know, without any knowing you at all, it means that the relationship of domestication that the farmer have with his cows is a very high level, very high level. And I never seen, you know, only a few cases of fatteners, but most of the breeders, they have a very close relationship. I mean, they could not sleep because the animals are sick or whatever. So we need to promote also the voice of the farmers, as Ines said, that are having these, you know, high expectations for their own cattle or animals or whoever.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would like now to thank my panelists, Leo Terán, Inés Granho Ajuda, and Antonio Vallard. And please give my panelists a very warm round of applause. Just one moment. We have just a little thank you gift for taking part, so just a little token of our appreciation. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to switch to our next panel discussion on livestock farming and the environment. So I would invite my panelists, Manuel Maya, Pablo Manzano, Catherine Gisela-Laniel, and Celia Neesens, to join me on the podium, please. Pablo, you go there. Yeah. And Catherine, I see, has just entered the room. Hello. Okay. Thierry, can we have glasses? Fresh glasses? Okay. Right. Welcome, Catherine. So, by way of introduction, ladies and gentlemen, I will introduce my panelists now. First to my right, we have Manuel Maya, who is an associate on his family's dairy farm in Vila de Conche, just north of Porto, since 2020, where he's responsible for milking, rearing, ensuring milk quality, animal management, artificial insemination, preventive medicine, and surgery. As we said earlier, all in a day's work, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And as you can see, Manuel, to my right, is a young farmer and graduated in veterinary medicine last year. Next up, we have Pablo Manzano, who is a researcher in livestock and the environment at the Basque Centre for Climate Change based in Bilbao. Pablo is a rangeland ecologist working on pastoralism since 2001. He started out his career in the area of ecological research in Spain, later expanding his interests into social, legal, and economic knowledge fields by collaborating with NGOs and the Spanish government. Next up, we have Celia Neesens, who is the policy manager for agriculture and food systems at the European Environmental Bureau, EEB, leading the work on agricultural and food policy. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Political Science from KU Leuven and a Master of Science in Global Environmental Politics from the University of Edinburgh. Interesting mix there, Celia. And last but by no means least, we have Catherine Gisela-Laniel, who is Director in charge of Strategy and Policy Analysis in the Commission's Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development since January 1st. From September 1st, 2020 until December 31st, 2022, she was Director at the General Secretariat of the Council, responsible for veterinary and plant health questions, food and forestry. Prior to her arrival in Brussels, she was the Executive Director of the European Food Safety Authority based in Parma. Now, many would say, of course, that Catherine is now very well placed in DG Agri to climb the higher echelons within the Department of Agriculture, and perhaps it's high time to see a woman in that top job. So a very warm welcome to my panelists this afternoon. Huh? Merci. Okay, Manuel, let's start with you. You're coming from a young dairy farmer perspective. We look forward to hearing your introduction, so please, by all means, take the floor and set the scene, as we say.
Thank you. I'm gonna start first to thanking the invitation. I'll try to do my best in English, okay? So I'm a young farmer. I'll bring you three examples of what I do in my farm, trying to help and make it easier and better to the environment, the sustainability. So here I have some photos of what we do related to the sources that we have, the energy, the water. So here we have some solar panels. We made an investment last year to buy some solar panels to produce the energy. We have some water recycle. We have there in that below image that show us two tanks. One is milk tank, the other is a water tank. What you do during the day, taking benefits with the solar panels, is to chill the water. So then with the milk sessions, we can mix the water with the milk and chill the milk without spending almost any energy with the motors from the milk tank. So we can save some money, save some energy. And then that water goes to a big tank, and then we can give that warm water to the cows, okay? Then I have another example of a flushing system. We wash our waiting area in the milking parlor with a big tank of water. Then we wash it. It goes to a little lagoon. From that little lagoon, we can pump it up again and reuse it in the next washes. So like 15 days, we can use the same water, and then we replace it. We try to save some water, save some money, save some energy. Another example is it's brewery drag. It's a waste from the beer industry. That's an example of what cows can do with our waste, human waste. We have a lot of examples. Here, it's an example of what we use in Portugal, because we have a big industry of beers, like 20 kilometers away from our farm. So we can pick it up from the beer industry. We can give it to our cows. It's fresh. It's rich in protein. It elevates the digestibility of the cows, so it's better for them. Mainly in the summer, they love it. Another example. Sorry for the quality of the photos. It was at the end of the day. It's our corn seeder. One thing that we have in our corn seeder, it's a tank for fertilizer. So this fertilizer can be launched nearby the line of the corn. With that, we can see in that photo, it's in the front we have the fertilizer pipe. In back we have the seeder pipe. So with that, we can put the fertilizer nearby the seed. We don't need to spread it out and lost a lot of fertilizer. We can be more accurate. We can save money. We can save the soil, because we don't need big amounts of fertilizer. And it's better for both sides, the pocket and the soil and the environment. So these are the three examples. We can talk a little bit more later about it or about the other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Maybe just, Manuel, just start us off with maybe your own trajectory, right? Are you just after finishing your studies in veterinary medicine? And
Yes,
so you're an associate on your farm since last year. Yeah. And maybe remind us of the scale of your dairy farm, for example.
Yeah, my dairy farm, we have like 200 cows milking. So I would like to say it's a medium-sized in Portugal farm. So I became associated to the farm in 2020, and then I finished my university course in 2022, last year. So that was my trajectory, and I have to say that a big difficulty to our farmers is that it's difficult to find young farmers that have studies. Okay, so I try to be different and study a little more. And I think it's a lot of important, because we made a new barn last year too. We made a big investment, and without my knowledge that I pick it up in the university, I probably will make a lot of mistakes that I didn't in that investment. So that's my small trajectory in the last years, and it's it.
Okay, and remind me now, I come from a country where the average herd size is about 100. You say you've got a herd of dairy cattle of 200. Yeah. What would be the average in Portugal? Far lower, right? I mean, it's a smaller, smaller scale.
100, yeah. We have two different realities. We have the north reality and we have the south reality. In the south, we are plenty of space. We have bigger farmers with 1,000 probably in average. In north, we have a lot of farmers, but smaller ones. And I say the average is probably like 100, as in Ireland, yes.
Okay. And then you pointed out some of the areas where you're sort of focusing on the environment, reusing, as you say, the byproduct from the beer industry, yes. Saving on your pockets, saving, looking at costs as well on your farm. How do you see that now under your managementship, with your, as an associate? How do you see the farm developing? Are you going to keep the number, for example, at 200 dairy cows, or how do you see it developing in time, keeping the environmental question at the center?
Yes, we sized the barn to go to the 300 cows milking, but we have space for buying a new barn at the side, so we can grow more. We try to do everything to be more sustainable, because nowadays in the past years, it's too difficult for a farmer and for a young farmer to buy something outside. All the cereals, all the materials to build a new barn, it's really expensive. So I think the ideology for a farmer, since a lot of years, is to be the more sustainability possible. So I was showing about the byproducts. It's been always like this. In the cereals that we buy, most of them are wastes, not the seeds, not the big part of it are wastes. So as associated of my farm nowadays, what I see, it's the costs are too high, and we as farmers need to take some measures and some guides to make it more sustainable, more friendship of the environment, of course, and we need to have costs. We need to know how much it costs for a farmer, because it's everything about the money.
Everything has, as you say, increased. Not only the war in Ukraine, post-Brexit, post-COVID, etc. Yeah. Thank you, Manuel, for that. We'll be returning to you in a moment. Pablo, you're coming from the Basque Centre for Climate Change. Perhaps you could maybe talk us through the work that it does in this whole area related to, in the environment, the interplay between the environment and livestock production. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you. Well, our research line in the group where we are doing climate change research on livestock is we are centering ourselves in establishing a new perspective on how environmental impacts of livestock precisely on climate change, but also on biodiversity, are perceived. Because there is a general problem in how livestock impacts have been interpreted so far. Namely, that livestock in general is perceived as being an anthropogenic activity, that is a man-made activity that makes man-made impacts on the climate, on biodiversity. However, from the ecological science, and this is actually my original background, we know that livestock are herbivores, and when they are having a role of herbivores that is similar to the one that wild herbivory exerted and shaped the biosphere in the last millions of years, they not only not have a negative impact on the environment, but they have a positive impact in the sense that a lot of ecological processes that are triggered by these herbivores are needed to maintain key ecosystem functions in the biosphere. So, for example, we have most of the floras of continental areas, including America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and also Australia, that have been shaped for the last millions of years under herbivory, under the teeth of herbivory, so that when you suppress them, you have biodiversity loss and ecosystem function loss, and a lot of problems associated even with land degradation and with scarcity of water. This translates into some of these livestock being necessary. However, as I was saying, only part of this livestock is like that, because also we have highly transformed, highly industrialized types of livestock that exert a negative pressure on the environment. And it's sad because we see in the press and even from some science that is practiced that livestock is handled as a block without any nuances. And there is a very big difference from the best livestock systems that we could say are the ways of producing food in the world that are more sustainable, compared to the livestock systems that are the worst and that are probably the worst way in the biosphere to produce foods. Also because they rely on crop agriculture massively, and that means that you add to the bad things of crop agriculture the bad things of livestock. So what we are developing now is like new metrics trying to establish which portion of the greenhouse gases that are attributed to livestock should be considered natural, should be considered part of the ecosphere, and which ones should be considered a net addition to the atmosphere, a net addition to the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and therefore should be counted.
Can you quantify that a little bit, Pablo? Can you quantify the impact of livestock production when it comes to GHG emissions into the atmosphere? I mean, how much is the livestock sector, for example, in Europe responsible? Is there a percentage that is sort of bandied about?
Yeah, the number that is now more common in media and in some publications is a number that was published by FAO in 2013, which is 14.5% of the total greenhouse gas equivalent emissions in the biosphere, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, because there is a natural greenhouse gas effect. And it's pretty key for what I just explained. But that's a publication of 2013.
And since then, for example, has that reduced? Has that gone up or gone down?
Well, the percentage has changed. The total amount has not changed much because the total heads of livestock in the world have not changed much. But the percentage has changed because the emissions by livestock have not increased, yet the total greenhouse gas emissions have increased. So the latest number given by the GLIM model of FAO, which is the tool that is used for that and which has a life cycle analysis perspective. That is, it not only includes the methane that is burped by ruminants, but also all kinds of gases, for example, the transport in the commercialization, etc. The latest number that was given last year is 11.2%. Mm-hmm. Okay. But as I was saying, much of this 11.2% is actually not anthropogenic, but it's part of these natural baseline emissions created by ruminants. And I think, it's worth mentioning a study that we recently published on the Serengeti. Actually, when we are talking about how the world will look like without humans, it's a complex issue because humans have modified nearly the whole planet. But fortunately, I have experience in working in Africa. I've lived 10 years in Eastern Africa, so I could get some data for the Serengeti area. If you know about it, the Serengeti is one of the major wild migratory systems in the world with wild herbivores. So we can consider that the carrying capacity of the ecosystem is really preserved there. So we compare the emissions per hectare of the very well-known wildebeest and buffaloes and all this African fauna with a nearby Maasai pastoralist livestock-dominated area, which, by the metrics that are used in FAO and in the GLIM model, etc., are considered as one of the least efficient livestock systems in the world because they emit a lot of methane per kilogram of product, okay? And when we compare both systems, because basically if we abandon livestock in that Tanzanian area, it will be taken over by this wild fauna, we found out that the emissions are the same. So it means that these emissions that we are blaming now to this, the area is called Loliondo, to these livestock in Loliondo, that we are now perceiving it as a very highly inefficient system that is polluting the world. Well, all these emissions are natural, and we shouldn't blame a single molecule of methane to those animals. Of course, this is a modeling exercise, so it's subjected to some degree of uncertainty. But I think it should raise red flags in how we have been considering these livestock systems that so far has been flagged as the worst in the world and are probably some of the best in the world. Also because they are mobile, they are imitating the way wild grazers modify landscapes, and therefore are also providing valuable ecosystem services.
Thank you. I might just go to Celia now, just for a moment, Pablo. Taking what Pablo said there, and also on the basis that we had a silent protest or a peaceful protest at the front of the Concert Noble just earlier on, saying that there is no future for the livestock sector in Europe. You're coming from a different perspective from the European Environmental Bureau. What's your take on this whole debate?
Yes, thank you. So the way that we see the livestock sector in the European Environmental Bureau, and I think in much of the environmental movement, is that animals have a place in a sustainable food system and in a sustainable farming system, but it has to be a much smaller place than the one they take now. And this is in line with what Pablo was just saying, is the vast majority of the farmed animals are not these wonderful, extensive, mobile grazing systems. Actually, grazing, or animal proteins coming from grazing systems only account for 1 gram out of the 27 grams that we currently consume of animal proteins globally on average. So we have to rethink the system, we have to be honest about it. And I think we can't hide behind these examples of beautiful pastoralist systems to say, look at these systems, everything's great, livestock is super important, we don't need to do anything. We have to be honest about the fact that in our countries, in Europe, that's not the majority of the livestock rearing. And what we've been advocating essentially is that, based on the evidence, on the science, the real problem is one of scale and one of concentration, and that's where we need to act in Europe. Scale, because we just have too many animals for our carrying capacity, for what we can handle in terms of waste, but also for what we can feed with the land that we have. And concentration, because so many of those animals are concentrated in very small areas, and that's how we end up with algal blooms in the Baltic Sea and terrible water quality in many parts of Europe where there are the most concentrated animal farming systems.
So what do you suggest, Celia? What do you suggest? You talk about that there's sort of the touch points there. You said concentration and the scale, the level of scale that we have. What is EEB suggesting then? Reduction of a herd?
Absolutely. We're calling for policies that can facilitate a just transition here. I'd like to refer back to what Ines was saying. It's really important that farmers are accompanied, and some of them need to be supported to change, to reduce numbers. Some of them might just exit the sector because they're old, because it's too difficult, or there's no way for their system to evolve in the direction that we need to go. But we need to move towards agroecology, and that means in the livestock sector having more extensive rearing and more mixed with arable farming, so that we're bringing back those two parts of the nitrogen cycle which have been really dissociated in the last decades through the intensification of livestock rearing, where we have vast areas with only arable cropping and nutrient deficits, and then vast areas with way too much livestock rearing and way too many nutrients. So moving away from that and reconciling these two systems, also that can mean having more diversified production systems at farm level, which can also make farmers more resilient. We are seeing nowadays resilience is key, and having extremely specialized system is not resilient. It's very risky, and we have to rethink that.
Thank you, Celia. Well, the perfect segue then to our policymaker, Catherine, in charge of policy analysis and strategy within DG Agri. Maybe you might, first of all, give your reaction to some of the points raised by your predecessors, maybe focusing on Celia's point there from the European Environmental Bureau in terms of livestock production and how policy is driving certain, I suppose, ways of producing food.
Yes, so maybe not just commenting on what Celia just said, maybe starting with, though interesting to see how farmers are already making efforts, and it's not just today, but making efforts to use better the resources that they are using, including water. So, you know, I don't want to make it everything rosy, but I think it's important to recognize that things are happening in the field. We might say that they are not happening enough quickly, but they are happening. So that's important. What you said also, Pablo, I found very interesting on the fact that depending on the practices, obviously, livestock can play a positive role on the environment. So as such, livestock is not bad for our environment. It doesn't only provide us with high quality animal proteins, it can also deliver, let's say, environmental services. But of course, it depends very much on the practices. Then this subject, and that would be also in a way my comment or my exchange with what has just been said by Celia, I think we need to reflect on the future, as it is the title of this conference, the future of our livestock farming in the European Union. I do think, and maybe I'll concur with everybody here, that there is a future for livestock farming. Maybe not exactly what it would look different. Why am I saying there is a future? Because, first of all, I think that we will continue to eat meat and dairy products, probably, and some would say, hopefully, for our health, a bit less than what we do today. And of course, this is on average, because at different age of our life, we have different needs. But that is obvious that if we want to move to more healthy diet, the part, you know, the quantity of animal proteins that we will have in our diet will reduce. We do not necessarily observe that at the moment. I'm very much interested in following what's happening. It doesn't really happen. And when it comes to meat, I looked at the last data that we have. We are increasing our consumption of poultry and reducing our meat from, let's say, mainly beef, but large ruminants. So maybe not exactly what you would like, but this is what is happening. And there are many reasons for that, including food inflation, which is important to take into account. So basically, I think that in the structured dialogue that President von der Leyen has announced in the context of her speech on the State of the Union, we would like that this question, there will be others obviously, but this question will be central, hearing and listening to the farmers, obviously, because the structured dialogue is conceived to listen to them, but also to all other stakeholders to see, you know, what is the future for this sector and how we can bring more benefit to our health, benefit to the environment, to climate, as well as preserve the livelihood of our farmers in areas where livestock is important.
Could I just jump in there, Kathleen?
Yes.
It was actually raised during the last panel discussion. People are curious to know what this structured dialogue will look like. You said it yourself at the European Parliament. I attended an event last week, and you said it was key to strengthen dialogue between the different actors in the food chain. Obviously, then your boss, Ursula von der Leyen, President Ursula von der Leyen, made the speech that she wants to invoke and generate a structured dialogue on the future of agriculture. But the details are a little bit thin on the ground. Perhaps you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, well, that's a bit early to give a lot of details. We've made some proposal to be fully transparent with you, and we are waiting for the green light for our president and the different commissioners that will be we will be involved in that process. There will be for sure a debate at different level, as I said, with the farming community, but also, because this is something I find very important, that we also work with not only farmers, but also the key players of the food chain. I'm convinced that the transition to more sustainable food system, and in particular livestock farming, cannot just happen with farmers. We need to make sure that, the whole food chain is also taking part to the transformation. Farmers have suppliers, they have customers. If you just work with them, it will not work. We need also to make sure that all the key players across the food chain will. So obviously we will frame the debate with a number of questions that we think from our perspective are central to the future of farming, but of course we will also open the possibility to citizens, consumers, NGOs, scientists, farmers, and key players in the food chain to contribute to the debate and to say also what is important to them. And basically our objective would be that this would start as soon as possible, I would say. I would say that this will start for sure in coming weeks. We need that, because then obviously we will use the outcome of this dialogue to feed into the process of the preparation of the future common agricultural policy, for which you might be aware, we intend to present the Commission, the future Commission will present a proposal in autumn 2025. So,
nothing beforehand, not a communication beforehand under this administration, sort of setting out the stall?
I think that the decision has been made, at least that's the way I understand it, not that the Commission would say this is the way forward, but listen and engage.
Okay.
That's the approach.
Thank you, Catherine, for that. Pablo, to go back to you, and I suppose the idea of science and research driving policy, right? Catherine has laid out very clearly, I suppose, the policy direction, and it will be informed along the way by this structured dialogue, this new concept that was sort of launched, as we say, on September 13th. But to what extent what are the main needs, let's say, for research in this whole area? You're coming from the Basque Centre for Climate Change. Where do we need to focus our efforts here? Leo earlier talked about investment, and he said that his colleague in charge of animal welfare has the smallest unit in the University of Liège. Where do you see the main area where we should be pouring our investment when it comes to the environment and the interplay with livestock production?
To be honest with you, I don't think, of course I want more money for research because I'm a researcher, but to be honest with you, I don't think we need much more money. We just need to integrate what we research much better. And this debate is a good example because, for example, Celia, you were mentioning that there is 1 in 20 animals in the European Union that are grazing animals, which is true, or what?
I use a different statistic, but...
Or but more or less...
1 gram of protein from animal source foods is from...
okay. One gram of animal source, protein of animal sources, but it's just the order of magnitude I wanted to highlight. It's because, it depends on how you use the scientific information. It's what I was mentioning, for example, on the emissions. It's true that there are very few animals in the European Union that are purely grazing, but you have most of the ruminants that are in the European Union have a significant part. It's mixed systems, it's true, but a significant part of their life cycle is under grazing. Like, for example, all the cows in Spain that, the calves go to fattening facilities, but the mothers are purely grazing. And then when you do a statistics on that, it's like 80%, so they are not purely grazing animals. What I wanted to mean with that is that usually we don't deal with scientific information in a complex way, and then you will for example, a consequence of that is that I agree that there is too much industrial livestock production and too much industrial animal source foods, but I also am convinced completely that there is a big lack of animals raised under grazing conditions. And this is ultimately the reason why we have a surge on wildfires in the whole Mediterranean basin that may reach very soon. I don't think Belgium, because Belgium is a very good example of extremely industrialized animal production, but in other parts of Europe that are abandoned, you do need that grazing because you have had that grazing for the last million years. And if you don't have grazing, then you have fires. And I tell you, this is a big issue in the Mediterranean. So usually we just deal with this as a monolithic thing, meat consumption, livestock, instead of digging into the complexity of it. So to be honest with you, I think in science what we need is a much more integrative work, a much more holistic, and just combining different specialities and different disciplines.
Thank you for that. Manuel, I might turn to you. You were nodding there when Pablo was speaking. The idea of technology transfer, right? The idea of all the scientific work in the field related to livestock and environmental protection, etc. How do you transfer that knowledge to farmers on the ground? I mean, you say that you just finished your studies, 2 years ago or so? So maybe you're in a privileged position. But how do we get that sort of knowledge in terms of livestock rearing, livestock production, doing it more environmentally friendly? How do you sort of are there farm advisory services? Is there scope to improve those services, for example?
Yeah, it's complicated to show to the other farms what they can do with some older barns, okay? With the prices and the costs, it's difficult to build new barns, to make the things different, because we have older farmers, like we were saying at last time, and we don't have a lot of younger farmers to can pick the old barns to make it better, to make the fields sustainable, to make the barns sustainable, to make the farms more environmental friendly. So my contribute that I try to give to those farmers, older or younger, is to search. I try to show them what I know, but to looking forward for the studies, what we can do with the roofs. If we can take roofs with 10% of inclination in our barn, or 30, we put 30, because it's better for the gases, for all the accumulation. If we have space for having 100 animals in our barn, why do we have 150? We are losing money. It's everything about the money, everything about the environment, because if we have healthier cows, we have biggest productions, we have healthier animals, we have good conditions, and the only thing that I try to say to them, it's about we cannot do it bigger if we don't have conditions to do that. Okay, if beside I make my new barn, I have like 200 animals or 220 in a barn when it's have space for eating like 150. I had bad animals. I don't have big productions. I don't have healthier animals, and now I have it. So it's like to change the mentality, the mindset of the farmers. It's something difficult in all the factors, in environment, in production, and that's we are trying to do as vets, as other farmers with some graduations. And that's why I try to do talking about this subject.
But as you say, I mean, that's a question of space as well, and unhealthy living conditions. Celia, I'm going to turn to you now from the EEB. What would you hope to see? I mean, you talked about scaling and you talked about the level of concentration, but what sort of measures would you like to see further down the line when it comes to sort of the future of the livestock sector? What sort of effective measures are there from the environmental perspective that you would like to see come on stream?
I can answer from the environmental perspective, but also what comes to mind is, of course, the animal welfare perspective. We've heard about it, but I mention it because really we need to come at this from many different angles, and we shouldn't just look very narrowly at one aspect. So also when we look at environmental aspects, we really have to look at everything together, not just methane on its own or just biodiversity on its own. So I mean, there was a lot of positive elements on the table in the Green Deal, and it's not all gone very well, unfortunately, but we should continue along that trajectory. So the animal welfare revision package really needs to come out, because that can push the bottom and set a floor that's higher than what we have now. The Industrial Emissions Directive also was a very important piece of this to address the most intensive and the most polluting farms and to ensure that action is taken at that level to reduce pollution. And of course, the Common Agricultural Policy is very important, and that links back to what I was saying earlier about this just transition. We really believe that this policy needs to evolve and needs to be at its heart about enabling this just transition. And we just yesterday published a paper jointly between BirdLife, EEB, and WWF, setting out our vision for how this can be done. And when it comes to livestock, some thoughts already now. Well, on one hand, we need to stop supporting intensive systems that are not delivering on environmental or animal welfare objectives. So coupled support for intensive systems, for example, which are artificially keeping prices low and promoting overconsumption. There was also a message in the WWF report recently. They need to be phased out. And then we need to also move away from spending money on untargeted subsidies like area-based income support and use that money more wisely to help farmers in this transition, because we recognize that this is hard. We're not pretending it's going to be an easy ride for everyone. But really that's where policies and especially public money needs to come in and stop promoting business as usual and instead really incentivize this change.
Okay, well, Catherine, this is a perfect segue for you. Just to pick up on the point, the recent WWF report that said voluntary couple support was driving meat consumption and driving, I suppose, intensive farming, right, in the livestock sector. And in the same breath, and I'm going to get a question, just my own question into you, you talked about, I suppose, the sustainable food system. And we don't have many Commission representatives today. You may have seen that your DG Santé colleague could not attend. Could we ask you in the same breath, where are we with the legislative framework on the sustainable food system? It has been, I think, put on ice as well because of a legal issue. The legal services have come back saying that you need to change your legal basis. So in response to sort of the Celia's point on some of the elements within this common agricultural policy and on the sustainable food systems, and then, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to put it out to the floor for questions and answers. So Catherine, no pressure, the floor is yours, okay?
Thank you. So on the new CAP, because it's a new CAP, we already think and speak about the future, but it's a new CAP. We've started to implement it as of the 1st of January. Maybe interesting to look at, we are preparing, as you may be aware, we are preparing a mapping, a report and a mapping of what we find in the 28 CAP strategic plan that member states have submitted to us and that we have approved. And we look at them not one by one, that we have already done last year, but collectively we look at how this, at least on the paper, because we are at a very early stage, how it fits and it will help to support the objectives that we have with this CAP, which is, more sustainable farming practices. And I make a bit of teasing. I'm not going to divulgate this report that is expected to be published at the end of next month. But just to let you know that what is interesting is to see that member states have included most, let's put it that way, most member states have included measure or used the toolbox of the CAP to support more sustainable livestock farming practices. Here I'm thinking about, we have many eco schemes as well as agro-environment measures, which are looking at, how we feed the animals, so supporting pasture for ruminants, even extensification of some farming practices. So that's interesting to see that. When it comes to couple support, it is, though, we have in some member states, like the one I remember, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, where there are hotspots in terms of the protection of the environment. They have here limited the density of animals, but this is not a measure which is, broadly shared in all region and all CAP strategic plan where there are measures for, where there are couple support. So just to say that. So maybe room for improvement there in the future to make sure that, so it's not as such maybe the tool that is bad, but it's the condition under which, you put in place a tool to support, better practices when it comes to livestock.
And on the sustainable...
Maybe I can say, and then I'll reply on the FSFS. I don't know what I'm going to reply, but this will come. Maybe to say also that, interestingly, I don't know whether you've noticed, we've published a couple of weeks ago a brief on areas under natural constraints, where you will see that it's interesting to see that we have specific dedicated support for this. So these are basically mountains or areas where you have, lower productivity for reasons linked to the soil and the environment and so on and so forth. And interestingly, here you see that in this area where there is support for livestock, you have less intensive farming practices, in particular for ruminants, obviously, and more also mixed farms, which is also interesting from an environmental point of view. You know that sadly we have less and less mixed farms in Europe, so the specialization continues, so a significant reduction in the number of farms, minus 25% every decade. So I don't know where we will stop. And second, we have more and more specialized farm and less mixed farms. So that's also a point of attention that we need to look at. On the framework for sustainable food system, we have worked hard. This is now up to our political authorities. It's complex, obviously. Let me say that what I find important for us, and if it's not right now, this will be coming, would be to keep at European level this approach which is looking at the whole food chain and not just at farming. Farming is important, farmers are important, but they cannot work in isolation. So this integrated approach. And the second point, you give me the opportunity to say that, you mentioned that in the first roundtable, this point which is also, how do we convey to consumers also, our consumers, the information on where we are, what are the practices when it comes to producing our food at all levels, when it comes to sustainability. We're not very good at that, in fact, and if as a consumer, except for organic, but for conventional food, we don't really communicate on that. There are many things that are good and going into the right direction, and we haven't been able so far, but there is still time to do it, and that was one of the objectives of the FSFS, to find a way to convey to consumers the message on, on animal welfare, fair remuneration of the farmers, protection of the environment, protection of climate. What is this product, this food product, delivering to me? And then I make my choice. And I think this would be useful. So hopefully we'll get something.
But as you say, a very holistic approach, but very complex, right? A very complex message to get across. There's costs, etc. And I believe that's sort of the on the sword on which it fell, right? I mean, the legal basis. But we'll come back to that, Catherine. I'm going to go open it up now to the floor, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a few minutes before we... okay, we've got a lot of interest here. Marco, please. Greenpeace.
Thanks a lot, Marco Redis. I have a question that links to things that Silvia and Paolo said. Paolo, you said that the livestock sector is often, almost always, presented as a block. And I fully agree with you, and that's a real problem. And Silvia mentioned the Industrial Emission Directive. Right now, Commission, Parliament and Council are debating to reach an agreement on the scope of this directive. The Council, the Environment Committee, the Parliament and the Commission basically agree on 350, 400 livestock units as a limit to include cattle farming. it means that the Industrial Emissions Directive would tackle farms that have more than these animals. These farms represent less than 2%. I think this is a real opportunity to finally do what you just said, trying to distinguish between the livestock sector as a whole and only a very tiny amount of farms which are responsible for the most of emissions of ammonia and methane. Are you in agreement with that? Do you think it's a wrong approach?
Okay, who'd like to jump in there? Are you familiar with the IED, the Industrial Emissions Directive?
Yeah, again, I have my issues with, I think it's a challenge of formulating policies in general. And this is why also you see that, that also, it's like the constraint that farmers face. There is a ruling, okay, that striving for more sustainability, but then the logic of the market of very cheap, because we are still in an era of very cheap fossil fuels and very cheap fodder derived from very cheap use of fossil fuels, no matter if there is a crisis in Ukraine or an isolation of Russia or whatever. So it will always strive towards the same direction of industrializing and on basing food production onto fossil fuels. So regarding that directive, I have my issues because I can envision some mountain farmers in the Mediterranean, for example, that are using communal pastures I have a friend that is a shepherd in the north of Madrid, like 100 kilometers north of Madrid. He has 2,000 sheep, he has 600 cows, and probably he would qualify as industrial farming, even if you regard it per hectare, the number of animals he has is low because it's purely pasture-based. And also, again, coming to the complexity of the metrics, you're talking about ammonia, and that's right. There you will target the most industrialized, the more concentrated farms. However, if you tackle methane, and this is why I was giving that Tanzanian example, I know Tanzania is in Africa, but you have extensive systems in Europe that are targeted as the most emitting ones, even if it's bullshit. Now we are talking about livestock, so I can use that word. Because these emissions are the same that, we are still lagging behind in science, okay? Because obviously we don't have wildebeest migrations in Europe, so it's very difficult to calculate this natural baseline here. You shouldn't only count deer. You should also count the amount of emissions from wildfires, but you also should calculate the impact of wildfires in the atmospheric OH minus sink, which is a complicated thing that I'm not going to explain right now. It's a complex modeling, okay? But at the end of the day, logic says that these livestock systems entirely based on nature are being targeted as very bad for the environment and cannot. Well, but if it's a very big farm, I understand.
Do you want to get...
It's about the density.
Yeah, you want to, Catherine, you'd like to...
I'm not an expert on this text, but just it's also about the density of animals, because the objective of this text is to protect the environment. Okay. So obviously, yes. There are limits to the capacity that a soil, can absorb manure, basically. So though they may be, they may be large, a large number of animals, but it depends on the soil that you have. Maybe I can say when it comes, so it's not on this text, but just to say that interestingly, when it comes to greenhouse gas emission, which is not just with livestock, obviously, but livestock is emitting, and in particular, a lot of methane. So it's interesting to say, and I like to say that because sometimes we are not very good in Europe at celebrating some of our success, and I think we should do sometimes, because we cannot make progress if we just say that we are all negative. I think one of the progress that we've made, though of course we need to continue, is to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emission from agriculture in general since 1990, though of course we are stagnating. The last 10 years we are stagnating. Yeah, you may disagree, but I think the other day this was in a report also mentioned by OECD that Europe is the only region in the world where agriculture has made some progress, though I agree with you, since 2010, we are stagnating. So room for improvement here. And the carbon intensity, I think you didn't use that term, but you know, the emission, if you use the emission per hectare, per quantity of agricultural product, has also reduced. So we need to further improve that. But I think that there are here, and it shows that we have solutions, that there are limitations, but there are solutions. And I think it's important to mention it, to encourage everybody to continue on this.
Pablo, just jump in briefly, and then I'm taking another question from the floor.
Very briefly, you are right that Europe, I think, is the region in the world that is making more of an effort in that and achieving results. However, there is a trick in that. I know the statistics because we have a paper published in 2021 on that, but it may hide also that some of these greenhouse gas emissions may have switched from a natural resource-based into fossil fuels. Because, for example, if you convert under the current metrics that we are challenging at the Basque Center for Climate Change, if right now you convert a sheep farm in Aragon into a pork farm fed by soybean cake from the not from the Amazon, but from the Cerrado or from the Argentinian Chaco, you will have a nominal decrease of greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, if you take our new metrics into account that still are going to be developed, you may find that this reduction is not real. Plus, the overall fossil fuel footprint of that production is higher with the pork system. So this is why I'm talking about the necessity to enter into that complexity.
Okay, thanks for that, Pablo. Question now. I'm going to take this gentleman here. Leo, sorry, I'm just going to take people that haven't spoken already. Please introduce yourself and say to whom the question is addressed.
Yeah, my name is Arno van der Aar from Orpha Editors. I have a question for Catherine. Because in your introduction you mentioned that steps are being made, but maybe not quick enough. And you have experience with EFSA and now in DJ Agri. There's a lot of companies developing new innovative products that can actually help transition to a more environmental friendly farming. Should we not consider creating more capacity at EFSA and fast-tracking dossiers, for instance, for methane inhibiting agents?
Okay. Okay, so you're wearing your former EFSA hat and now DG Agri hat, Katrina.
Former is the
yes.
important word.
Former is important, yes, go ahead.
Well, here you're raising the point which is linked to, you know, how our regulatory systems, environment, you know, is making, allowing, you know, innovation to arrive fast on the market, which is a broader issue. We may not be, I don't know, and that may be taking into account the audience, you may think that we may not be the best in the world. So I remember I have struggled with that. So I'm pretty sure, I would say that there is room for improvement, though of course I'm sure that in Parma they do their best, but that's important. I said, maybe I would broaden the question, which is, I think that already we need to continue to have innovation and research. I'm the first one to say that we need, my God, I made a lot of impact. We need innovation and research, but it is important when we say that not to undermine or underestimate the fact that we already have a lot of solutions already now, so not an excuse not to take action. That's what I wanted to say. And here, don't misunderstand me. I'm for research and innovation, but we already have a lot of solutions that we can implement, and that farmers, just to talk about them, or the food industry, or the feed industry, are using. And we need that. We will need that. And maybe to come back to a point that you made also, Rosa, which was about, you know, knowledge transfer. I do believe, I'm convinced that the future farming system will be more knowledge intensive. We are not going backward. You know, we will need more expertise, knowledge, data and evidence for the farmers to make a better job, let's put it that way. So obviously this question of, you know, transfer of knowledge and innovation, also innovation on the ground, also that feed into the work of our research is something that in the current CAP, I am not saying it, OECD is going to say it on the 9th of October in the report that they publish on their review of the Common Agricultural Policy. They say we do a better job with this CAP, but of course we need to further improve.
Okay, and that's your job, Catherine, right, in DG Agri, in terms of in your role as Director for Policy Analysis. So we look forward to that. I'm going to go lastly to Leo. You did have a question and I kept it from you, and then we're going to have to wrap up this session. We'll have a nice coffee break then, a well-deserved coffee break. Okay. Okay, Leo, sorry about that. Okay, go ahead, please. Introduce yourself.
Martin Mullen from Sept. I don't have a question, but rather a request. I think already touched by Pablo that we need to have a more holistic approach. And what I see is that when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions coming from agriculture, we mainly speak about the protein that comes from animal source, so either it's the meat and the dairy products. However, me coming from the chemical industry, you say what I'm doing here, it's also because we source a lot of raw materials coming from the animals, the byproducts, and we producing different chemicals, life-saving, like heparin, which is used in surgery to prevent clotting of the blood, but many others like gelatin, which is used in pharmaceutical application as well. So my request is really take into account also all those byproducts, which are essential for our European way of living, and that you include that also in the carbon intensity. Because if we are not able to produce those different substances and products, and I think there are maybe as well for paints, the brushes, the leather, there are many other products. If they need to be replaced by, I would say, fossil-based products, then also it needs to be included in the whole calculation of the carbon intensity of the livestock.
Okay, thank you for that. Leo, I'm going to get a microphone up to here in the front row, if you don't mind, and then we're going to wrap up this session. Can I get a mic up here, please, front row? Yeah, to Leo here. Leo, you heard from earlier.
It's a question for Celia. So in Belgium, it's exactly the situation that Pablo described. There are different sectors. Okay, you have the north, you have the south. In the south, we have 2.6 large animal unit per hectare. Where do you put the level where you want to go in your plan?
Yeah, that's a bit of a trick question, isn't it? Because there isn't one number for everywhere. Essentially what we say is we have to look at the carrying capacity of the natural environment. We have to look at what the land in that environment can provide in terms of feed, what it can absorb in terms of waste, and then see what's sustainable in that regard.
Pablo, briefly.
Short note, in my research, I have been seeing how, I know it's going to sound like crazy, but mobile systems are way more productive, up to 5 or 10 times more productive than sedentary systems, because animals move in nature. So I know it sounds crazy, but in a fossil fuel-free world, we are going to turn back doing that again. And then carrying capacity will go up.
Okay, well, we're going to have to wrap that up there now, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a warm round of applause to my panelists, Manuel Maya, Pablo Manzano, Catherine Gisela-Laniel, and Celia Neesons. We're now going to break, ladies and gentlemen, for a well-earned coffee. I think you would agree we've kind of gone gung-ho since we started at 2 o'clock. I look forward to having you back here in 30 minutes. So that's at 4:35. We'll catch up on time later on. And the next session will start going at 4:35 on the role of healthy diets and nutrition. Thank you very much. They probably switch them on when, yeah. Just pull me. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now ask you to be seated, if that's okay, just to go back to your seats, and we'll get cracking with the next panel discussion. Okay, well, I hope you're fully sated after that coffee break, well deserved after the discussion beforehand. We're now going to get cracking with our third panel debate on the role of livestock in healthy diets and nutrition. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce my distinguished panelists. First up, we have Stefan de Sept, who is Professor in Animal Science at Ghent University, teaching courses in animal production and meat science. Having grown up on a livestock farm, a bit like myself, Stefan graduated as an agricultural engineer at Ghent University in 1986 and went on to obtain his PhD in 1993. He is also Vice President of the Belgian Association of Meat Science and Technology and is co-author of around 250 papers in peer-reviewed journals. Next up, we have Alice Stanton, my fellow Irish woman, who is Professor at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and she also is Director of Human Health at Devonish Nutrition. Alice is a clinician scientist who holds a degree in medicine and physiology from University College Dublin, a postgraduate degree in statistics from Trinity College Dublin as well, and a doctorate in pharmacology. She is currently a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in Ireland and a professor of cardiovascular therapeutics at the aforementioned Royal College of Surgeons. And lastly, we have Camille Perrin, who is a senior food policy officer at BEUC, right next door, right, Camille, the European Consumer Organization, where she leads the Consumer Umbrella Group's food team. Camille holds a Master of Science in Food Science and Technology from the National School of Agronomy in Nancy and a Master of Science in Nutrition from Montpellier University in France. A very warm welcome to you all, and please give my guests a very warm round of applause. So, Stefan, you know the drill. We invite you to set the scene. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rose, for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to be part of this panel and for setting the scene. And I want to do this by a brief reflection on the way I communicated and communicate about the nutritional value of livestock products when teaching or in other types of communication. So, as you said, I grew up on a farm amongst cows and pigs. And so I entered university because I was interested in agriculture. I stayed at university, started doing research on quality of animal products. And in the beginning, that was all very technical. We tried to improve the quality of animal products by altered feeding strategies, etc. And when teaching to students, that was all very technical. At that time, more than 90% of the students had an agriculture background, a livestock background, so there were no questions. It was common sense to see livestock products as good foods, I would say. But that has changed throughout the years. Because gradually now I think less than 10% of the students in agriculture have a background in agriculture, and they're more open-minded, that's the good thing, but at the same time, they question also the value of animal source foods. So I got the opportunity in 2004 to visit Mongolia, and then I, for the first time, realized, although I should have known, of course, but for the first time realized that, there are populations in the world, societies in the world, where you cannot survive without eating livestock products. It's impossible to survive there. These people live on meat and milk. And then, together with, of course, I started thinking about that, and with other information on the co-evolution of human and animals and how important it is from a historical background. And still today, these are now the type of slides that I use in my courses, just not really to defend, well, to defend livestock products, but just to remind of what is common sense, I would say, but what we have forgotten, or at least part of the students have forgotten, for the simple fact that they do not have a background in agriculture, and actually I do not blame them for that, it's just how it is. Later on, we shifted a bit our research towards also looking at the possible threats associated with consumption of livestock products, because in the, let's say, last 10, 20 years, quite a lot of epidemiological studies emerged on potential risks associated with consumption of animal source food, particularly red meat and processed meat. So we got also interested in that, and actually I feel quite fortunate that I look at the taste of meat and the beneficial nutrients in meat, but at the same time at the possible threats, and we're also doing some research on that. Now, through that research, I was invited to be part of that panel at the International Agency of Research on Cancer, looking at the carcinogenicity of red meat and processed meat. And I still have mixed feelings about that exercise. On the one hand, I learned a lot during that week because I got in contact with epidemiologists, etc. And I also observed the discussions that I had among the epidemiologists. The outcome is what it is. I think there's much to say about the way it is done. Still, purely scientific, it was not a bad exercise. I think it could have been done better. But what I realized already during that exercise and also afterwards is that the main problem is the communication afterwards. The way these findings, which were purely scientific, the way how that was used in policy and in public health messaging, that's really dramatic to my feeling. And that's where we are now. I think several points will come back during the panel discussion. But as a result of that, I think this happened in every country. I was invited a couple of years ago on a debate on a TV show. Actually, the title, I will translate, "The Future is Vegan." So the opponent was a vegan advocate, very nice person, by the way, so he was very polite. But the strange thing is that I was there to defend livestock products, not the other way around. He had not to argue what the benefits of a purely vegan diet would be. I had to argue on the value of eating livestock products. But that's where we are. That's how we have to deal with our student population at the university, and we will have to find a way to deal with that. I'm not good in that type of stuff, communication, but I think it's the clue. Compared to environment and the animal welfare discussion, where personally I think there's much more scientific questions still to be resolved and challenges for the sector. When it comes to nutrition, I think the science is quite clear. Of course, there are questions on the scientific side, but that's not the big issue, I think. It's the perception that is not okay, and we will have to find a way to deal with that.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for that. I think food for thought, so please be seated. And just to pick up on some of those elements that you raised, let's go back to that debate. That took place, am I guessing, in the Netherlands or in Belgium?
In Belgium.
In Belgium, okay. So you spoke about, I suppose, the merits of consumption of food of animal origin as part of a balanced diet. Maybe just remind us how important these sources of protein are for certain cohorts of the population, such as children and the elderly, and then we'll dig down a little bit on what are your views on calls towards the switch to a plant-based diet. So they're my two opening gambits, my two opening questions. The importance of animal source proteins for certain fragments of the population, and also these calls to switch to a plant-based diet.
Yeah. well, the importance of animal source foods for nutrition is simply, I think, because it's the best guarantee to meet nutrient requirements in terms of protein, in terms of essential minerals, vitamins, because animal source foods have a distinct difference in composition compared to plant source foods. They have, of course, both their benefits, let that be clear, but they're quite distinct. So a good mix is essential for a balanced diet, simply also because of the fact that we are omnivores. So we evolved as omnivores. We have the flexibility to go more into one or another direction, but our digestive system, our metabolism, has evolved to deal best with a mixed diet. So it's, for me, quite obvious that we need this.
Okay, I turn to you now, Alice, from the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, and also, as you say, Director of Human Health at Devonish Nutrition. Let's dig down a little bit then into sort of the diseases that are prevalent in our society at the moment. We've got cancer, cardiovascular diseases, anemia, very widespread. I know you're a specialist, I believe, in cardiology, hypertension. Let's talk about the link there between, for example, the main causes of these diseases and the link with food consumption, and maybe dig down a little bit into the detail.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to start for the
microphone.
I'm going to start with reminding us of what is the definition of a healthy diet. And the WHO definition, I agree with. A healthy diet has to do two things. It has to defend against nutrient deficiencies. And Stefan has alluded to those. But it also has to protect against non-communicable chronic diseases, such as cancers, heart attacks, strokes, and diabetes. And in actual fact, unlike cigarette smoking risk goes like that from the first cigarette, and the more you smoke, it goes directly upwards, probably exponentially, and it reaches a huge amount. So the risks for lung cancer and heart attacks are probably increased fivefold, so 500%. The relationship is different with food. There are excesses of food that cause or contribute to the causation of those non-communicable diseases, heart attacks, strokes, and cancers. But the big excesses that cause problems are calorie excess, salt and sugar excess, and that's particularly with ultra-processed foods. We're now seeing big relationship between ultra-processed foods and obesity, heart attacks, strokes, and cancers. Any possible relationship with red meat and processed meat is tiny, and it's with very excessive consumption. You just don't see a relationship with consumption of red meat below, on average, 70 grams a day. Even if you go to 150 grams a day on average, the maximum risk for particular diseases such as colon cancer is about 15%. So compare 15% with 500% increase with cigarette smoking. It's small, it's uncertain, the 95% confidence intervals are very close to zero, and if you put that red meat, if you eat it as part of a balanced diet with fruit and vegetables, that association disappears totally. So small, uncertain, and may not even exist. When you look at dairy, and in fact I got involved in this area because I was hearing health professionals say, we all know red meat is bad for you, and so is dairy. And I said, show me the evidence. So I've dealt with red meat. Dairy, actually, the evidence is up to 3 portions or helpings a day of the equivalent of 250 mLs of milk. So 750, 800 mLs of milk, or its equivalent in cheese or yogurt and butter. that actually protects against colon cancer, breast cancer, heart attacks, strokes. It actually protects against obesity, and it protects against total mortality. There is no doubt that dairy is good for you. Likewise, for fish, particularly oily fish, up to 3 portions a week definitely protects against heart attacks, strokes, and very likely protects against mental illnesses, psychosis, and Alzheimer's. So I think the relationship is U-shaped, if it's there at all. Too little causes problems, it causes deficiencies. Too much, either as part of an unbalanced diet or an excessive calorie intake diet, can cause problems. But a balanced diet that includes both plant-based foods and animal source foods is good for us.
Okay, Alice, I'm just going to jump in there if you don't mind. As the saying goes, you are what you eat. So from your professional experience, what are the main gains to eating less meat or incorporating a flexitarian approach in your diet? Are there benefits?
I think we do probably need some further research on what is the optimal percentage.
Because you come from a country like my own, we eat a lot of meat, right? We are carnivores, we are omnivores. You talked about, what was the amount you gave earlier in terms of grams? 170 is sort of the excess. What's the daily allowance that's sort of optimal, as you say?
Well, the current intake in the UK, we have pretty accurate figures, is around 25 grams of red meat, 25 grams of white meat, and 25 grams of processed meat. So in total, about 75 grams of meat a day, spread throughout the week. That's the average. That's not to say that some people
and there
aren't
are extremes.
having...
There are extremes,
yeah,
right?
and there are some people who are not eating any meat at all. But that is the average intake. That's probably pretty close to optimal. 50 to maybe 90 grams a day is pretty good.
And what about this, following on from Stefan's point about the shift to a plant-based diet?
Yeah.
Again, we had some demonstrators, let's say, outside Conseil Noble, shifting. What would happen, in your view, if we were to shift to a plant-based diet, if we were all to do that?
Well, I think that was proposed, and I think everyone in the room has probably heard of the Eat Lancet reference diet. Or hands up, who has heard of the Eat Lancet planetary diet? Well,
so maybe recall the details. This is January 2019, right?
2019, yeah. And prior to that, most international guidelines would have put at least quarter of the plate, so at least 25%, up to maybe 30% of calories coming from animal source foods between a mixture of meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. The Eat Lancet reference diet actually said it should go down to 12%. So that was a pretty dramatic shift, and it was probably a quartering of red meat. That has been reanalyzed by some of the authors of the Eat Lancet report, in particular by Professor Jessica Fanzo from Boston University, and published in Lancet Planetary Health. And they said, along with Tyg Beale from GAIN, and when you take into account actual nutritional requirements and bioavailability, they said actually 12% of calories coming from animal source foods is not adequate without supplementation. And the revised adequate diet that they propose actually has gone back up as a minimum requirement, 26% of calories coming from animal source foods. The amount of red meat and white meat quadrupled, fish and eggs doubled.
Were you involved yourself in that calling for the correction?
No, we got involved, both Stefan and I got involved in challenging the Global Burden of Disease collaborators who publish a lot of data which is used by very influential bodies, by the WHO, by the UN, by the EU Farm to Fork, concerning both deficiencies and chronic diseases. And the 2017 report said that red meat was causing 25,000 deaths worldwide. And that was possibly correct. Excessive red meat consumption could possibly, low certainty evidence. But their 2019 report said it was causing almost 900,000 deaths worldwide. So that was a 36-fold change without providing any evidence whatsoever. So Stefan and I, along with 4 other colleagues, challenged that. We got a letter eventually published in The Lancet, and we got a climb down. So the Global Burden of Disease collaborators eventually in Nature Medicine published that actually there was no definite evidence that red meat caused any deaths whatsoever.
Okay, Alice, I'm going to now turn to, thank you for that. I think you provided a nice overview there in your introductory comments. Stefan, you wanted to chime in there on the basis of what Alice was saying about your involvement in that.
Very briefly, to pick up on the question, at what level should we then arrive? There is a quite recent paper from a French group who looked at how much animal source foods we need to cover all the nutrient requirements, not only protein but also micronutrient, assuming that we do not use supplements, of course. And they arrived at an estimate of about 50% on a protein basis. On a protein basis should come from animal source foods. So with energy it will be lower. So I think it corresponds, but it's quite a significant proportion, of course. It's lower than what we on average consume, I think, in Europe, but still it's a significant proportion.
Okay. Well, now, thank you for that, Stefan. We're now going to go to Camille, who's offering a different perspective on the situation, I would imagine, from the consumer's point of view. You're from BEUC, as I say, the European Consumer Organization. Maybe if you react, first of all, to what Alice and Stefan said, and then provide your perspective on the matter.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, I will concur with Alice and Stefan that Europeans, most Europeans are neither vegan nor vegetarians. I would say even far from it. We rather have a situation whereby Europeans don't eat enough fruit and vegetables, don't eat enough whole grain cereals, don't eat enough legumes and nuts. And at the same time, on the contrary, they eat too much red and processed meats, too many calories, too much fat, too much sugar and salt. According to the European Commission's own data, in many countries, consumers' meat intake is 2 to 4 times higher than recommendations. And just as you were asking about recommended meat intake, Rose, actually I brought some figures with me. I've had a look at the dietary guidelines, you know, the food plates, food pyramids across different member states. And for instance, in Spain, the recommendation is that consumers should eat maximum 3 portions of meat per week, and trying to prefer poultry as opposed to red meat. In Italy, the recommendation is 400 gram meat per week and only 1 portion, so that is 100 gram of red meat. In Belgium, the recommendation is to limit red meat intake to 175 grams, and in any case, no more than 300 grams. You've heard, I'm sure, of the Nordic dietary recommendation that were published recently, and that caused some discussion. And they recommend maximum for red meat to limit red meat intake to 350 grams a week. So that is really what is recommended, and that's not a lot. Actually, if you look at a normal meal with meat, like it's maybe a meal with a sausage, and another meal with a tartare, for instance, for the whole week. So it's really not a lot. And many consumers believe that they meet these guidelines, whereas they are not. I think we need to also be aware of the fact that even though most consumers have some sort of knowledge of those recommendations, it's really hard for them to put them into practice, because we've heard earlier Ines mentioning the role of food environment, and I would like really to second what she said on this. Science is clear now that consumer choices are heavily influenced by different actors from the food sector. I will mention the food industry, the retailers, they really have a huge role in consumers' food choices, but also the food service sector, for instance. Even though consumers want to eat more healthily, for instance, when it's cheaper to buy healthy snacks than a fruit, or when your smartphone keeps sending you push notifications with discounts for burgers, it's really hard for consumers to resist. And the healthy choice is not the easy one. So that's now been clearly established by science. There was a report published in June this year by the group of scientific advisors to the European Commission. And it's important that we transform these food environments, and that includes marketing and advertising practices, price signals, also to make sure that the healthy choice is the most affordable one, but also even the food offer in the supermarkets, at the restaurants, so all these elements need to change.
And how do you go about that then, Camille? What's your sort of, I mean, Inej discussed it in her panel, how do you find that kind of multi-stakeholder approach to kind of influence the food environment and to point consumers, to encourage consumers in the right direction? And of course, then you're dealing with a situation where we've got a cost of living crisis and we've got food inflation going sky high. So you've got a lot of odds there against you, right?
Well, actually not, because surprisingly, a healthy diet should not necessarily cost more. For instance, and our members try to raise consumer awareness on the role of pulses in a healthy diet, for instance. If you swap beef in a chili con carne recipe with pulses, it's cheaper, it's healthier, it also means less CO2 emission, so it's a win-win, and also for food security, because we know we have this food fit competition. But coming back to your question about how do we have multi-stakeholder cooperation, well, actually, this is why we were really and eagerly waiting for the Sustainable Food System Framework Law, which has been discussed earlier, and we would really like to have some indication and reassurance as to whether it will be published or not, because that was exactly the aim of these new pieces of legislation, to bring some policy coherence and also to put all actors around the table to transform food environments. And there are lots of recommendations, but also even for EU policies. And it was also mentioned by Ines, but we have the promotion policy for agri-food products. On the one hand, consumers are told, and I've given you the data, there is an overconsumption of meat, but at the same time, EU taxpayers' money is used to promote meat and increase consumption, and in some countries, it's specifically to address the fact that younger consumers consume less meat, which actually is what they should be doing. So there is this inconsistency, and so we hope that this framework law will eventually try to bring some coherence there. Yeah.
Thank you, Camille. And of course, the EU promotion policy is under review as well at the moment. Maybe that's something we can discuss later with Roberto, I see in the front row. Alice, you wanted to chime in there on a point that Camille had made.
I think we have to be aware of how influential that original Eat Lancet reference diet report was. So the WWF Live Well diet and the Nordic dietary guidelines are essentially based on the original Eat Lancet reference diet, which is now, by its own authors, being declared to be inadequate. So I do agree, absolutely, that there are some people who are eating excessive red meat and excessive processed meats, particularly when it's in the form of ultra-processed foods. But it does depend on where you're starting from. And I think we have to realize that women and children, even in the Western world, so in European affluent countries, in America, 20 to 30% of them are iron deficient. Some of them are not eating enough animal source foods. It's even worse in low and middle income countries. We need to have equity and good access to nutritious food, which absolutely includes 2/3 to 3/4 of the plate needs to be plant-based and lots of fruit and vegetables. We need to turn the focus on how do we do that sustainably, and we need to be equitable in our distribution of food.
And of course, there's iron sources from the likes of kale and spinach, etc. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you're going to get your iron sources from beyond animal protein.
It is interesting that in the revised adequate diet, the amount of legumes and nuts were halved. And the logic of that was that they contain anti-nutrition factors such as phytates, which bind iron and zinc and cause micronutrient deficiencies. So we need to be careful, we need to consider the whole picture of the diet before we say plants good animal source foods bad.
Okay, okay, you both want to come in there. I'm going to let Stefan first and then Camille, okay? So Stefan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to continue on that because I fully agree with Camille that our current diets are not what they should be. I fully agree, and that we should evolve towards another ratio of plant-animal protein. I fully agree on that, particularly for the high consumers of livestock products. But what I have a big problem with, and I've seen it in the nutrition policy bodies in Belgium also, that we are blaming animal source foods to promote another dietary lifestyle. We should not do that. They have good value animal source food, and the risk is, or let's say it another way, if we reduce our livestock source food production and we increase vegetables and fruits, etc., that would be the first solution. The risk today is that we replace it by vegan analogs that are ultra-processed, and then we are worse off. We are worse off. And that's, yeah, that's, I'm really afraid of that because that's, we see it already happening. I've seen it at my own university.
How do you mean we're worse off, Stefan? I didn't pick up on that. How do you mean that? In what way are we worse off?
Nutritionally, we're worse. And as Alice already said, there is debate about, the impact of ultra-processed food on chronic diseases.
Sure, sure. Camille, I'm just going to give the floor to Camille and then Alice, you, okay?
Thank you. There are two different issues being discussed there, and I think I would agree with Stefan that we need to increase the intake of fruit and vegetables, I mean healthy fruit and vegetables and pulses, and reduce the intake of meat. Just maybe to pick up on what Alice said about the nutrient recommendation dietary guidelines. The one for Italy, for instance, they were developed before the Eat Lancet, so even though they recommend very low amount of meat, that was not influenced by the Eat Lancet report. Now, about the role of meat analogs or plant-based meat and dairy substitutes, certainly, and that's also the message of our members, the consumers organization across Europe, consumers should prefer as much as possible homemade vegetarian meals with pulses, etc., to reduce the amount of meat that they consume. But that doesn't mean that consumers also need convenient alternatives, and in some cases, you have some meat analogs that have a relatively good quality. They are very different, because just like with processed meat, you have very different products, some which have very high levels of salt and saturates. It's the same with these meat analogs. You have a very different composition, so some are healthier than others. Many indeed are ultra-processed, but for instance, if you go to McDonald's and get chicken nuggets, which are also very often, excuse me, but not great quality. Well, what difference does it make if you go for the vegan option, knowing that in any case, the meat that you would get with these nuggets is certainly not of good quality. So these are really two different discussions. I think it's important at least that we agree on the baseline, which is that in the EU, we eat too much meat. And I was also checking yesterday a report from EFSA, an opinion from EFSA that was published last year. It relates to nutrient profiles, and they looked at the nutrients and food categories of importance for European diets. And when it comes to protein, they did not say that there is any deficiency in the EU population. You may have some specific individuals in some specific groups like the elderly or children or pregnant women, but that's not because of some individuals who may require specific medical advice that we should not have a clear message at population level, which is that we overconsume meat in the EU. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Alice, you wanted to chime in there? And then I wanted to ask you a question on a point you raised, but go ahead.
I think we need to look at ultra-processed foods, whether they're animal or plant-sourced. I am very concerned by what I see on the labels. And I have looked at a lot of the plant-based alternatives to meat. They can contain, instead of containing 20 grams of protein per 100 grams, they can contain 3 grams. That is not an adequate replacement. And they can contain 5 times as much salt as fresh meat. Mm-hmm. Again, that will contribute to hypertension, strokes, and heart attacks, and probably gastrointestinal cancers. So food labeling and education of people with what switches they should make is really important. And it's difficult. People are not very knowledgeable about what is the usual protein value in meat and dairy products, and what are the usual salt and sugar content of whole foods. And I think the final point, we only measure about 20 to 30 bioactive chemicals, so between vitamins, minerals, essential amino acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids. There's thousands of bioactive chemicals in whole foods, both fruit and vegetables and meat and fish. Actually taking a protein powder, throwing a couple of vitamins and minerals into it, and adding some salt to give it flavor and some kind of fiber to give it a texture does not replace a whole food.
Okay, very clear. I'm going to now open it up to the, thank you, Alice. I'm going to open it up to the floor. As you can see, it's a very dynamic discussion up here. We've actually gone a little bit over time already, but there's a gent right here who would like to ask a question. Introduce yourself, please, and right here with the green sweater. Oh yeah, could we get a microphone over here? Thank you. And it's Pablo, right? And I can barely see you, Pablo, because there's a light over you. There's a halo shining. Pablo, go ahead.
I'll be very short. I see that, it's a question for the three of you, but I think the three of you have considered that. I see that there is this category always invariable, meat and processed, red meat and processed meat products. But from my knowledge in working on mobile livestock systems, it's absolutely not the same when you have meat and milk from animals that have had a lot of movement, okay, like for example transhumance production, nomadic production, that have a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids and other nutritional properties that indicate that they are pretty good for health and for the heart. And for me, it's something that is tough to understand why they are put in the same box as ultra-processed meat products. And therefore, for example, comments that Camille has done in her intervention make sense because you don't differentiate from these products. But I know, for example, from Turkana pastoralists in Kenya, that these products, these meat and milk products, dairy products from animals that do a lot of exercise, are actually very healthy. So why is it that nobody makes a difference?
Okay. Stefan, would you like to jump in there?
Yes, because we're also involved in some of that research. There's, by the way, a huge European project going on looking at the quality and the nutrient composition of livestock foods from very diverse production systems, from very intensive to very extensive. There are differences, definitely, well documented in the literature. And I fully agree that they should be more documented and reflected in nutrient composition tables, because at present this is not considered. At the same time, I think we should not exaggerate these differences in terms of nutrient supply. For instance, for polyunsaturated fatty acids, you may find 2-3-fold differences, but in the overall diet, it makes a difference. But I think we should be honest. When it comes to fresh meat or milk, for instance, these differences are not huge either. More importantly, I think, is what Camille also mentioned, the processed meats, and there's a huge differences in processing, minimal processing, a dry cured ham, just salted and dried. I do not see major issues, but of course there are many processed meats that are questionable, and the same with vegan analogs. So I fully agree. We should get a better view on that, because now it's indeed all put in the same box. So there's definitely a place. I don't want to be misunderstood. There's definitely a place for vegan analogs in the diet, but we should not stimulate a shift to a more plant-based diet, which I fully support, by blaming fresh unprocessed meat or milk, because the evidence, as Alice clearly mentioned, the evidence, scientific evidence, is not there.
Okay, I'm going to ask both of you maybe just to briefly comment in response to Pablo's, either one of you, yeah. Camille?
Yes, I will not enter into the scientific details because Stefan probably knows more than me in there, but to Pablo's question, the type of rearing system that you mentioned, how much can it produce and what would be the cost for consumers? Because I think we also have to be honest, the meat that many consumers eat today, and also because of the inflation, as you mentioned, Rose, is not the type of meat that you describe, Pablo. It's very often ultra-processed meat, and as consumer organization, looking at label is really our job. So I can tell you that if you go to the supermarket and go for sausage cheese, in many cases, if not in most of the time, you would get additives in there, and colors as well in some merguez, for instance. So I think there is also this myth that meat is not ultra-processed, and it's always more qualitative than vegan alternative. That's not always the case, so we also have to be careful there and more nuanced. And I also would like to bring perhaps some nuance when we talk about more plant-based diet. What do we mean with this? Very often there is some exaggeration and even a bit of scaremongering, like if we were to tell everyone to go vegan. It's really not what it is about, because again, I want to repeat that we have an overconsumption of meat in the EU. So it's just about reducing shifting the ratio plant versus animal proteins. And for instance, Flanders have this objective of switching or reaching by 2030 a ratio of 40% animal proteins versus 60% plant proteins. It doesn't seem like extreme, so I think we also need to bring a bit more nuance there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Camille. And Alice, final word there?
Yeah, I think just from the epidemiological point of view, so looking at the impact of unprocessed red meat versus processed meat, sort of minimally processed versus, yet there are variants which are ultra-processed. They're all thrown into the same box. And it's very difficult to actually see which might be more problematic. My feeling would be that it would be any meat product or plant product that is filled with additives and filled with salt in particular, or in addition to other chemicals that may be most problematic. We can produce, so I think it's not just the movement of animals that produce the increased nutrient value, it's also the variety in their diet. So I've been involved in an experiment looking at sheep and beef production on multi-species swards as opposed to perennial ryegrass. And yes, again, you get quite a difference in nutrient density. But like Stefan, I'd be reluctant, while you get a doubling or a quadrupling of polyunsaturated fatty acids, it's still at a relatively low level by comparison to oily fish.
Okay, thank you for that, Alice. We're going to actually wrap up this panel session right now. My thanks again to my distinguished speakers, Stéphane de Sept, Alice Stanton, and Camille Perrin. A very warm round of applause to all of you. You return to your seats. Thank you very much. I would ask the technical staff, yes, just to present you with your parting gifts, some Belgian chocolates, some fine Belgian chocolates. Don't ask me about polyunsaturated fats and et cetera, We'll talk about that later over a drink. I would now ask the technical team just maybe to get us more glasses, and then we'll go for our final session. We're nearly there. We're on the home straight. If you'd like to, yeah, just the chocolates, thank you very much as a thank you from all of us. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll see you later. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we'll just get the glasses sorted. And now I would invite the speakers for my last panel debate. Roberto Berruti, Pablo Bernados Hernandez, Marco Conchiero, and Pekka Pessonen. So please join me on the podium. Roberto, you're right here. Pablo, you're next to Roberto. Marco, you're third. Pekka at the end. Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're on the home straight now. We'll finish up again at 6 p.m. as I said. So, pardon me? Do you need, could we just tone down the spotlight on Roberto?
No, it's fine.
He's getting a little bit shy up here.
I have the sunglasses.
He brought the sunshades. Okay. We've had 3 very broad-ranging debates, I think you would agree. So now we're going to look at the high-level sort of panel on the future EU policy on livestock. So I just have one announcement to make. Roberto Berruti is standing in. On the program we had Joanna Stavova, Roberto's colleague in the cabinet, but by way of introduction, Roberto Berruti is also a member of the cabinet for EU Agriculture Commissioner Janusz Wojciechowski. And in the cabinet, you are responsible for files related to direct payments, rural development, Horizon Europe research, and the EU promotion policy that was mentioned earlier. So a very warm welcome to you, and thank you, Roberto, for standing in at the last minute. I believe your colleague has some troubles to getting back from Rome. Okay.
Earthquake and strike.
Okay. That's a sacre combination, as you say. Next up, we have Pablo Bernardos Hernandez, who holds the position of Deputy Subdirector General at the Spanish Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Pablo graduated in veterinary medicine in the year 2000, and since 2005, he has been a member of the national veterinary body. At European level, he is spokesperson for the Spanish delegation in the group dealing with animal products of the Committee on the Common Organization of Agricultural Markets. And of course, it's been a busy few months for you, Pablo, in the chair, as your country is in the chair of the presidency of the rotating presidency of the Council. Next up, we have Marco Contiero, who is EU Policy Director in Agriculture at Greenpeace EU since 2006. About the same time when I started working at AgriFax, Marco, we go way back in our career. Marco is a lawyer by training, specialised in environmental and agricultural issues. He holds a master's degree in European environmental law from the University of Amsterdam and another master's degree in international trade law from the University of Padova, and has emerged as a leading voice, one could say, on agriculture and environmental issues at the Green NGO here in Brussels. And last but by no means least, we have Pekka Pesonen, who is Secretary General of the EU's largest farm lobby organisation, Copa Cogeca. Pekka is a qualified agronomist from the University of Helsinki and previously served as State Secretary for the Finnish Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry. He has made no secret of the fact that he would like to return to his native Finland. So for those of you interested in taking up quite a, let's say, not the easiest job in town, you can get your CVs into us afterwards, okay, Pekka? So let's... If you read it in AgriFax, it's fact. Okay, Roberto, let me start with you. You're in the unenviable position, I would say, because we didn't have a DG Santé representative earlier. Can you offer some light as to where we are at with the revision of the legislation on animal welfare? Has it been put on ice? Has it been shelved? Is it off the table? Can we expect anything under this administration?
First of all,
microphone.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. Sorry, I've been told to replace my colleague just the last minute. And personally, compared to the previous panel, I feel so little. No scientific background, no competencies in nutrition and so on.
But you're coming from a political perspective, which is also an interesting stance, let's say.
And you asked me about the animal welfare legislation, but let's make a step back. There is a commission that is going to an end. We started with 2 pillars, the green transition and the digital transition, and with 2 strategies, farm to fork and biodiversity strategies. And then, after those statements, we implemented all our daily work on the idea to increase the sustainability in all over Europe. and not just on a forestry topics, but also in the agricultural topic. Let me just say that the CAP was and is, from our point of view, the central point to help the agricultural all over Europe to be more sustainable. When I say sustainable, I do not mean just the environmental leg, but I mean also the economic and the social leg. And a lot we did in terms of putting inside the CAP elements that could be helpful to move toward a more sustainable livestock breeding activities. And we supported a lot in terms of money. 11 out of 28 strategic plans in 11 countries have a specific chapter devoted to animal welfare. I link what I'm going to say to what I heard before about consistency. We are investing, addressing a lot of taxpayer money in helping the farmers, the breeders, all over Europe to transform their own activities in a more sustainable activity. And in the same time, we have to be consistent. So we cannot, on the one hand, use the taxpayers' money to help them, and notably the farmers, which are not, together with the breeders, protagonists to influence the consumers. I guess more able to influence the consumers could be the big companies able to do that, but in the same time processing or ultra-processing the food, just as a small parenthesis. And jumping on the word, which is a key, consistency, we face the revision of the promotion policy, the Sustainable Framework Law, the animal welfare legislation, based upon these principles. And
so where are we with those three pieces of legislation? Very key. Let's just answer the question. I mean, in the sense that, where are we? Where are we? Are they dead in the water? Are they gone? Are they shelved? I mean, you talk about promotion policy. You're responsible for promotion policy within the cabinet.
Up to now, we proposed a proposal which is stuck.
It's stuck, right? Okay, we understand that.
Which is stuck because it was not so ambitious in terms of
which proposal are you referring to here? Animal welfare or the...
No, promotion.
Promotion.
I'm following this legislation. This one has been presented beginning of this year, 2023, has been turning around because it was not enough ambitious in terms of, for instance, delete from the list of the eligible products to be promoted red meat. For instance, it's one of the products that has been proposed to be deleted. From our point of view, we stayed quite firmly, and we presented this proposal, including red meat, among the products able to be promoted. But I was reaching that point, the consistency. I heard before from your compatriot, which should be go toward a healthy and balanced diet. And I heard also from the representative from BEUC that there is an overconsumption of meat and ultra or just processed meat. And then I will ask which is the difference on a scientific base, because there is no definition, official definition of ultra-processed meat, or ultra-processed food. There is just a definition of processed food. So, just to be consistent, we spend or we devoted a lot of money to help farmers, breeders, to transform, the European one, to transform their own livestock farming in a more sustainable farm, to be compliant to our principle established at the beginning of this mandate. And on the other hand, we penalize, or we want to penalize, the same people that made huge investment to reach that point, and they are able to produce meat, not either processed or ultra-processed, and they have to promote their own efforts to be able to remain on the market. I would say the promotion policy is peanut.
It's what?
It's something so small compared to the entire European budget.
But it sends a very strong message, though, Roberto. It sends a strong message, yes.
And is a way, a tool to educate consumers. And my idea to educate consumers is, according to the maintaining budget devoted for meat, let's raise the quality of the meat, and inevitably you diminish the quantity, but you remain on a balanced diet, avoiding a priori the possibility to promote deleting red meat, for instance, and alcoholic wine or superalcoholic. That were the two main. No, don't worry.
As you say, it's stuck. In any case, that particular piece of legislation.
I'm explaining also.
I know, but listen, I have 3 more panelists here, Roberto, so I might just draw a line under that. We'll come back to some of those points in a moment, okay? Pablo, I'm going to turn to you from the Spanish Ministry, if you don't mind. Obviously, Spain is one of the biggest livestock producers we have in the EU, and I'm just wondering what sort of initiatives has Spain taken recently to ensure a very sustainable sector when it comes to the environment and the socioeconomic viability?
Well, Spain, yes, we have a strong commitment with sustainability and the transition, ecological transition, but on the other hand, you told we are a powerhouse in livestock farming, and we know from Spider-Man that with great power comes great responsibility. So our responsibility in this term is to make livestock being more sustainable. We're trying to make this with a holistic approach. That's why in the last years we have undertaken a review of the new, of all the regulation that requires the management of the farms. This is a piece of legislation that affects to cattle, to poultry, and to pigs, and attends to all the standards that may comply a farm. Includes location, the maximum capacity, the size of the farm, which is fixed in a maximum capacity, also the distance that you have to spend from one farm to another, and this is important. We have talked before about how to avoid the excess of charging some landscape with farming. We have this problem in Spain, so we want that the farms could be in some other places. We have, you know, depopulated areas where it can be. And of course, it has a lot of requirements on animal health, on animal welfare, and on environment. If you think about this, it's just a kind of strategy for all the main sectors. We try to draft the legislation in close cooperation with farmers because we are setting minimum standards. This is very important, for example, when you think about from a sanitary point of view. Because in times of African swine fever or avian influenza, your health, your standard of health is as good as the worst of your farm. So it's very important to update this level by increasing biosecurity of the farms. But also in the environmental field, we focus into facts. The first one has to do with manure management, which is also linked with another piece of legislation, an agronomic one, that tries to make a sustainable nutrition of soils, and also to reduce emissions related to livestock by setting some standards, some reference to individual farms, and setting a database that locates and monitors individually the emission of this farm. We can act strategically. We can set if farmers are complying or not with this compromise of reduction. Okay. But the regulation goes much further. It goes also to the operation of the farms and the responsibility, especially in two main personalities, the veterinarian of the farm, which is responsible of setting a program in a sanitary program and an animal welfare program, which are mandatory for every single farm, and also to the owner of the farm that is responsible for the rest of the management program, including the training of all the operators, because now in Spain, training of every person in contact with animal is also mandatory. In short, what we're trying to do is to upgrade our farmers and upgrade our farmers to transform slowly the livestock sector by transforming all the farms and also being them prepared to the things to come. Then if you have good farms, you have good farmers, and we do, you will be prepared for the things to come in the field of the farm to fork strategy.
Thank you very much for that, Pablo. I turn to you now, Marco. Future of EU policy on livestock, the future of the livestock sector. Do you think there is a future for beef farming, poultry, dairy production? And what would you like, how would you like to overhaul the sector? You're coming from the Greenpeace perspective, so that's quite different. You've heard a lot of debate today, the animal welfare side of things, the environmental capacity, the environmental protection, biodiversity, etc. And then most recently on health and nutrition. So you're coming from Greenpeace, a very powerful NGO, I would say, in influencing policy. What's your perception on today's debate, and how would you like to see EU policy on livestock going forward?
Thanks a lot. I'd like to start from something that Pablo just said, and is the fact of the need to be prepared. I think transition is clearly inevitable and unavoidable. Climate change is finally showing its real impact in Europe. It's just the beginning. It's likely to be much worse in the near future. Consumers are changing their habits. Millennials are much more prone to change, as Leo said before, sorry. We have increasing health concerns, not only because of what we eat and how we eat, but also because of air pollution, because of water pollution. We have been, and Becca knows much better than me, seen a slaughter of farmers in Europe. We lost 5 million out of 14 million in just 15 years. It's 37%. And this is and will increasingly put a pressure on the production sector. And that's why it's a pity that we didn't discuss yet about it, but the Sustainable Food System legislation is for the first time a policy tool that looks at things in the way in which we should all look at things, meaning having an holistic view. It would be, and I hope it will come up, and I hope there will be a lot of political debate on that. For the first time, we'll be able to see all the food system and start looking at who benefits and who pays the cost. Clearly, farmers are not on the side that benefits out of a current system. And I'd like to see Becca Kopako-Jeka being seriously pushing for that policy to come up. Because a policy that looks at the role of farmers, but also the role of the input industry before farmers and everybody else after, a policy that will, for the first time, start looking into mandatory requirements for all the other food system actors, that would finally trigger the discussions that we all need to have. Meaning, how much money should a farmer make if then many other people make 5 times more in 6 and 7 other stages of the production, the food system? That's the debate. The debate is not, should a farmer be causing a specific health and environmental harm? Is, why don't we encourage that farmer to act, and why don't we provide that farmer with the necessary reward and encouragement and profit? because that farmer is a person that has a business and eventually has a family to feed, as well as everybody in this room. And I'm very pissed, sorry for saying that this legislation, as well as many others, are being used as an electoral terrain of war by conservative parties who have decided to use specifically farmers as an electoral tool to win elections. They are leading a tragically short-sighted campaign that doesn't look at the medium term, let alone the long term, for very clear short-term electoral gains. But they are playing with the lives of people. I don't think, how can we defend a status quo when the status quo has led to 5 million farmers disappearing, increasing air pollution, increasing water pollution, increasing the respiratory diseases, etc., etc., etc. So I'd like to see that, for me, livestock should, the future of livestock depends on how we start addressing it. And so far we have been seeing both sides mentioning a few facts, but the real fact is we are producing far too much animal products, not in the right way, as Pablo was mentioning, and we're not paying farmers to produce better, we're not encouraging consumers to eat better. It's very complex, I'm not saying it's easy at all, but can we have this political debate?
Sure.
Well, the sustainable food system could have been, and I hope it will be, a terrain to have that sort of debate.
Thank you very much, Marco. A very impassioned plea there. But before I go to Pekka, I'm going to turn back to Roberto. Again, unenviable position here, Roberto, but I am going to use your voice as a cabinet member for the Agriculture Commissioner, who holds a lot of sway in the European Commission in terms of driving policy. Is it dead, the Sustainable Food Systems Regulation? Is that sustainable, as Marco says, this holistic approach looking at sustainable food systems from farm to fork and beyond, a very incorporated dialogue? Is that piece, I mean, it's timing, right? It's European elections around the corner. It's a certain political group within the European Parliament that has decided that this is going to be the mainstay of the electoral campaign. So it's really a matter that, have we just parked it until the next administration?
I don't know if it's completely part of that or still under the reanimation, in the reanimation room. But the problem is the technical and practical timesheet that anything that will come out from the Commission as a proposal will not have the possibility for the trilogue that should be under in terms of process, because the Parliament has entered or is almost going to enter in the 6 months of inactivity.
But we've been talking about this for ages, the Sustainable Food Systems legislation.
No, I just wanted to go back.
Yeah, but it could have been tabled easily in September.
On the reason why has been delayed. The reason is what Marco was mentioning, the middle, not for the farmers, which I represent here in terms of Cabinet Commission for Agriculture, and not for the consumer, but for the food supply chain in the middle, that probably were not so happy to be part of the chain under the rules of the Sustainable Framework Law. But what Marco said is exactly what I was going to say. We promote, I wonder why you mentioned that 5 million of farmers has disappeared in Europe, and out of them a lot of breeders, livestock breeders, and now somebody from your organization was so vocal in deleting the possibility to promote European meat under the promotion regulation produced in a sustainable way, in a sustainable manner, paid by taxpayers money from the Commission to transform their own capacity in producing a sustainable way, if we are talking about consistency.
Are you referring there to Greenpeace, that they would have been lobbying to remove meat from sort of the text, but also that was a political decision, I would imagine, coming from the top down, from Timmermans, no? Okay, listen, I am going to give the floor now to Pekka, because Pekka has been patient over there. Yeah, sure, Roberta. Pekka, please, the floor is yours. You're representing Copa Cogeca, representing farmers from across Europe. You've heard the whole wide gambit in the debate. So my question to you is the policy on livestock fit for purpose? Is it fit for the future? And keep on mind the topics that were raised by your fellow panelists, if you want to pick up on any of those points.
Well, I think we wouldn't be here if we didn't think that it's not fit for purpose. That's the whole debate has been organized for. We miss those tools that would actually increase the size of the cake. So Marco, you are right in a sense that we should see the opportunities in future in terms of the investment, but the historic role of livestock production has been and will be also in the future to increase the size of the economic performance and economic return from the agricultural activity in rural areas. That's why livestock sector exists in many parts of the EU, because it actually processes the biomass that otherwise wouldn't have any value. And that increased size of the cake now should be more sustainable agriculture. And like you said, that farmers have been used as a part of the conservative voice. Why don't we have the progressive voices to come forward to say that let's put an economic value to the sustainability for rural economy and farmers and make a bigger cake for the agricultural sector to the performance so that they would make a living. I can guarantee that you would have millions of farmers to get on board to that kind of initiative. But why is it that the whole European Union political apparatus is geared towards more red tape, additional cost, which is actually running the current development? Ukrainian war and the food inflation in general is just another hiccup in the bigger picture to emburden agricultural sector and especially the livestock sector with additional requirement that most of us would not like to pay in the consumer euro. And Camille, I believe that you know this. From Belg perspective, you know that the recent development in the marketplace clearly shows that the consumers don't give a damn, sorry my language, about, for instance, organic. We do not like that. So the big question and the commitment that I'm looking for is from the progressive forces of the EU institutions, Greenpeace alike, or the Green Party, or any other organization that considers to be progressive in terms of sustainability, to come up with solutions that we would increase the size of the cake that the farmers or rural people could actually generate in order to make better living. I can tell you that you will have the commitment. And in this respect, coming back to the livestock, we haven't seen a proper policies in place. We had lengthy discussions with the cabinet and Roberto and the commissioner. And when the first initiatives came to the table, and I met with the commissioner, and I told him that how are you going to sell this idea of excluding red meat to your own Polish farmers? And I think he understood very well that the EU money for sustainability, not for the red meat or beef alone, but the Commissioner understood immediately that those initiatives the farmers put in place, in this case in his native Poland that I challenged him, would not be rewarded by the European Union taxpayers' money to the better, more sustainable livestock. So therefore, we certainly welcomed the initiative to bring that red meat back, because then that's also a motivation factor to our livestock farmers. And one element that was missing in the previous discussions in the panels was that when we talk about industrial farming, we need to keep in mind that that industrial concept is a concept that has evolved over the years. My own parents didn't get permit for a 24 dairy cow farm in 1972 in my native Finland because it was too big, too industrial. So we had to be happy for 20 dairy cow, state-of-the-art, last scientific evidence barn to be built, brand new, and we were so proud. Now, 2 months ago in my same county, we have 600 dairy cow farm plan on the table, and everybody is supported to this because everybody feels that it would sustain agricultural activity in our region, in my locality. So, is it industrial farm? My local people don't seem to think so. But what we need to think also from the sustainability point of view is that how do we combine the industrial scale that some people may consider with those initiatives that would actually improve the sustainability of livestock production, animal welfare like. It would be more energy efficient, it may be also intensive, but if it's better for the environment, for instance, for more efficient land use, to save some land for other purposes, why wouldn't we do it? And especially if we, at the same time, could improve not only the environmental performance and the animal welfare, but especially if we could come up with the solutions also for the nutritional value, like, for instance, Alice pointed out. This would be a perfect combination of win-win-win situation for all of us, and I'm absolutely convinced that our members would go for it.
Okay, thank you, Pekka. I'm now going to open it up to the floor. Are there questions for this dynamic group of gentlemen up here? This is your chance. Manuel Maya, young farmer from just outside Porto. So, who spoke earlier? So, Manuel, who's your question for?
Yes, it's a question a little bit of point of view of my country. I don't know if you know our reality. I will not talk about last year because it was a different year. But in the last 10 years, our average price paid to the farmers, to the dairy farmers, was like 30 cents per liter. Okay. And I think the average in the European Union was like 42. So that topic is very important to bring to you. We are talking about the policies. Because we have to understand that the money spent in all the policies that we can do, it's very important because in my reality, I produce like 200,000 liters per month. If someone paid me more 10 cents per liter a month, I win 20,000 euros more at the end of the month. So, and then what we see in our country in the last 10 years, it's we produce our milk by 30 cents per liter, and then we go to buy it on the shelves, and we see like 60 pence. How to explain to a farmer that has all the work to produce the milk, that then with the pasteurization of the milk and the packaging and putting it on the shelf, it costs another 30 more. So, just like Marco was saying, farmers, I think the future farmers want to make a difference, to be more sustainable, and we need to get bigger, I think. That's why some farmers are quitting, because they don't have the enough capacity to be more sustainable. So why they are quitting, and the other ones are getting bigger. Because I think the more industrial farmers we have, they probably will be more sustainable and more environmental. So I think the point here that I want to take is that farmers probably will be more concerned about it if they have some money return on it, okay? Because they don't have time, they don't receive enough money. So I think it's important to the policies being focused on that, on the farmers, and to be concerned with that question of
okay.
money.
Thank you, Manuel. I might just get Marco to jump in. I'm not sure you were saying we should be scaling up, right, Marco? I think you were looking at generational renewal. You were looking at people leaving the sector, and how do we remedy that? How do we attract younger blood into the sector, which is something Pekka Pesonen is also very keen on. But maybe you want to react to that about the price issue, right? Farmers receiving 30 cents per litre, charged twice that. I mean, there's obviously a disparity, and there's a middleman or at the end of the chain creaming the crop, basically.
I fully share your point of view. I think this should be a clear issue that we should all be discussing about and trying to understand how it is possible to increase that profit margin. Because nobody wants farmers to disappear. My organization is the least organization that wants to have fewer farmers and bigger farmers, which are more efficient. So I'm fully in line with you. I hope it will be possible to have policy debates like on the sustainable food system where this can be addressed seriously. One word on efficiency, when it comes to environmental and health impacts, and when efficiency comes to play a role, there is a risk, and that risk is that we increase the overall, for example, greenhouse gas emissions or emissions of pollutants, but we make it in a more efficient way. That is a problem because we've been so far, very often, if not always, compared efficiency with sustainability. Efficiency is not sustainable if it leads to an increase in production. And again, we go back to the economic reality. Farmers don't want to produce more heads of cows if they make the same amount of money. The question is, how much can we earn with what we produce? The center of our discussion should be, how can we reduce the general overall amount of animals, because in Europe we are overproducing and over-consuming, by managing not to kill 2/3 of farmers on the way, because that is the problem that we need to address. I mean, CAP money, we still have 60 billion euros decreasing. We've seen in 2008 and in 2018, we always have problems. Where do we find the money to do that? And then suddenly 400 billion just being found somewhere to bail out banks throughout the world in very different countries. Money is, we can find the money, I know. But the question is really, can we debate about where that money should go? And I'm ready immediately to fight to have more money in terms of incomes for farmers.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Thank you for that. Thanks for responding to Manuel. I'm going to ask Pablo to respond from the Spanish perspective and maybe to pick up on Manuel's point about the disparity between what the producer receives and what consumers pay, and maybe sort of the implementation of unfair trading practices, how Spain has sort of led the way in that regard.
Yeah, this is a tricky part. In Spain we have a law for this, and we are trying to set the control of the contracts, trying to comply with the cost of production. But I think that also there's an interesting point in the upcoming proposals, because if you think about the food sustainable system or the animal welfare proposals, both of them includes labeling. And labeling is very important because it will create added value if we do it properly. One thing that is important is to have different levels so that the farmers can have different choices depending on their size or their possibilities, because not everybody can graze and not everybody has the same land. So it's a good thing in creating added value and especially preserving the added value in the producers to have different options, clear options, and if possible, they are created by and in cooperation with farmers, because the other way around is the retailer who sets the benefits of the labeling. So it's very important to have different products and have these products at the same time in the market. Why? Because it's what is adapted to the different income consumers we can have. Then we will have different price for different products adapted to the different ways of production. I think this is something that shows potential in this kind of regulation. So we will need in all these proposals to fix what's mandatory, what's voluntary, and what's voluntary, how can we label it, and how can we inform the population, inform the consumer to get the proper added value of the different ways of production, because there's a demand from the consumer, so we really need to expect that the consumer is going to spend money on it.
Thank you, Pablo. I admire your positivity, saying that there are upcoming proposals when the signals are a little bit, let's say, grey. It's a grey area up here, guys. It's a grey area. Pekka, you wanted to come in, and then we might take one last question from the floor. Karsten Meyer at the back, UECBV, and Pekka first.
Just a comment concerning these financial aspects. We talked about this famous 400 million euro redistribution. Please keep in mind that that is within the existing CAP framework. The whole CAP framework, let's say that it's 60 billion euro per annum, and due to the recent inflation, let's say 10%. It's more, but let's say 10% just for the sake of calculation. It's more than 10 times the size of the crisis fund that we spent so many weeks, and the Commissioner Wojciechowski had to argue with several member states how to spend the 400 million. We lost much bigger part of the real value in the CAP framework. What this tells us is that for the future of our economic prosperity in agriculture, and especially livestock, we have to go out there to the marketplace. We are not going to have double the money from the taxpayers. Hopefully we get, but then your bet is as good as mine. We need to get the money from the consumers. That's why I'm calling for our stakeholder groups, including Greenpeace and our stakeholder groups, to talk about this sustainability from the point of view that we could actually make it economically viable for us. We desperately need that bigger size of the cake that we could actually base our investment so that our young farmers that invest into our agricultural activity would make a living. That's what we need. And that's exactly what the policies should aim at. Making sure that that sustainability initiative that is so important for us would make economic sense to the biggest stakeholder group that actually is supposed to deliver millions of farmers in the European Union.
Okay, Roberto, would you like to chime in? Microphone.
I just wanted to chip in on the passage that Pekka did now. I guess there is an intermediate passage, the use of financial instruments in the middle, because it's true that the grants will decrease inevitably for the inflation, for the real power of the money and whatever. But we worked a lot during this mandate to set up something called green taxonomy. We kept the chapter of agriculture out because we had the presumption that CAP is the copy and paste chapter to be included inside the green taxonomy. But this will open the gates to use better, and the RRF gave us a good lesson to learn, to better use the financial instruments, so the loan instrument, to compensate a little bit before going to ask or to claim for a help from the consumers. It's a little bit complex.
The financial instruments they're not really an instrument that's being utilized.
It's not being utilized so often, and I would like, my feeling, I'm responsible also for that.
I saw that on your CV, right? Correct, yeah.
My feeling is that in the same time that we use the promotion policy to educate consumers in going toward a healthy diet, a healthy balanced diet, the same we should do in educating the farmers in using more often the financial instruments combined with the grants to make that action of leverage and being able to make the right investment towards sustainable, a more sustainable manner to produce and to breed.
Okay, thank
for
you.
Instance.
Thank you, Roberto. Last question, Karsten Meyer, UECBV.
Thank you, UECBV, the Livestock Trade Union. This is dialogue, and I'm happy about that. But a bit puzzled when Marco said on the one hand, give us more money, share more money. That's great. But these are like the Chinese words are nice, but hands lay egg. The Greenpeace papers I know asking for reducing more than half of the livestock, You just mentioned 37% slaughter already done, so are we at? Can we start the dialogue? Open for that, as said, and still the question open from the moderator, I think, is there a future for the livestock?
Marco, you'd like to respond?
Yeah. Just a go. The 37% is the amount of farmers, so businesses that disappeared. What we call for is to decrease in the production, so in the amount of animals, in the amount of animal products, cows, pigs, poultry, etc. I don't see a problem there in the sense that we base our requests on the environmental and health problems that EU institutions, EU agencies, the European Environment Agency tell us about. 95% of ammonia comes from agriculture, 90% comes from livestock. 80% of terrestrial biodiversity loss, 80% of soil acidification and water pollution. We do have to address methane, ammonia, nitrogen, phosphorus, health impacts from other issues such as the overuse of antibiotics as well as zoonotic diseases, and I stop the list. Where I want to, the message I want to send is the decrease in the amount of animal products produced in Europe does not mean killing farmers at all. First of all, because farmers are already dying at an incredible pace. And second, because the real issue, central issue is farmers' income. And farmers' income should be clearly higher than it is today. Consumers should be driven to buy quality products and to decrease the amount of bad meat being sold in supermarkets, by food chain, via public procurement, etc., etc. So there are, I mean, we should spend a few hours discussing about this topic only, but there is a crucial difference between the amount of animal products produced and the amount of income that those producers are getting out of it. And I hope the reason why I don't like Weber's and the EPP's Farmers Manifesto is that I don't want to increase EU production of livestock, because I think this is going to be a real nightmare for livestock producers in Europe. I want to increase quality and income.
Okay. Pekka, final word, because we are wrapping it up now. Pekka and then Pablo, and then we have to wrap up the panel discussion.
Well, if we cut the 37% of livestock numbers on average per farm, I claim that we would not get 30% that cut replaced by the market returns from to the farmer. That's not how the market works. The flexibility adjustment of the market just doesn't allow that. So that's exactly the point. We need to increase the size of the cake so that the consumers understand that they have to pay more for more high quality, more sustainable food. We agree on that. Ladies and gentlemen, from our Copa-Cogeca perspective, and I believe that I also speak on behalf of European Livestock Voice, we are certainly committed to the better future of our sector. We are very committed to more sustainable agriculture, the agri-food chain. We believe very strongly that there is a very good future for especially European approach, because I personally and our team certainly believes that European way of producing food is the most sustainable at the moment in this planet. Thank you very much from our point of view, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Pekka. Thank you very. You can take over, huh? Thank you, Pekka. Pablo, final word for you. The Spanish Ministry of Agriculture, the Spanish Presidency of the EU. Final word to yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. What? Okay, thank you very much. I agree with Pekka, and also I think that the future have to stand also considering technology and the evolution of the farming, because we cannot consider that the things are going to set stationary. So we really need to make things. I think that as policymakers we are supposed to be under the principle of not touching too much. You have to touch, but you're not supposed to break anything. So before reducing the amount of livestock, maybe the first strategy should be to transform it into more sustainable, in line with the agri-food model of the European Union, because we have built in this model for decades, and I think we have a lot of things we can be proud of, and there's still one part of selling this model to the consumers and selling this model to the rest of the world, and I think there's a work in progress and there's a room for progress in these matters.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's it, folks. My very sincere thanks to my panelists, Roberto Berruti, Pablo Bernados Hernandez, Marco Conchiero, and Pekka Pesonen. A very warm round of applause. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of... No, we haven't come to the end.
And to our moderator, Rosa Donovan Agrifact.
Thank you very much, Pekka, indeed. We have now come to the end of our conference, and before we go our separate ways, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for taking part today, to all the panelists, to all you participants, and to those of you joining us online, to the European Voice, Livestock Voice team for putting all of this show on the road, especially Jörg Seifert, Tula Semi, Anna Granados-Chapat, and another fellow Irish woman, and my fellow compatriot, Claire Carlisle, with whom I had the great pleasure of collaborating. A word of thanks also to Thierry and Sarah and all of the technical team to my left who made sure that everything ran so smoothly. A word of thanks also to all of you who participated online. We thank you for your attention and for joining us today. And from us here at Concert Noble, we wish you a lovely evening. I would now ask the technical team to stop rolling the web stream.